Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jackson Daniels, but everyone calls me Jack. No, I'm not related to the whiskey company. I get that question a lot. I've been a park ranger here in the Great Smoky Mountains for 15 years now, and before that, I spent 6 years in the Marines. I learned how to track from my Cherokee grandfather when I was just a boy. Over all these years, I've found 89 missing people. Some alive, some not. But I always found them. I never believed in Bigfoot stories. To me, they were just tall tales told by city folks who saw a bear walking on its back legs and got spooked. Mountain people knew better. We knew what belonged in these woods and what didn't. That all changed in February of 1964. It was the worst winter we'd seen in 30 years. Snow piled up higher than truck windows. Ice covered everything. The cold bit through your bones no matter how many layers you wore. All the normal wildlife, deer, rabbits, even the bears, they were starving. Desperate animals do desperate things. That's what I thought at first anyway. The trouble started at 3 different farms near Cades Cove. Old Man Henderson called the park office first, said something had gotten into his chicken coop and killed every bird he had. But it wasn't normal killing. The chickens were drained of blood, he said. Bite marks on their necks looked almost human, but with long teeth like a dog. 2 days later, Mrs. Patterson found her goat torn apart in her barn. Same thing, no blood left, strange bite marks. Then the Kowalski family lost their pig. Big animal, maybe 300 pounds. Whatever killed it had dragged the body a quarter-mile through the snow. The farmers were scared. They wanted the Park Service to do something. These were tough mountain people who'd lived through the Depression and 2 world wars. It took a lot to frighten them. So I loaded up my gear, winter clothes, my .30-06 rifle, emerge, NC radio, food for 3 days. The forecast called for another big storm, but I figured I'd have time to check the area and get back before it hit. I was wrong about a lot of things that week. The first farm I visited was Henderson's place. The chicken coop looked like a tornado had hit it. Wooden boards were ripped clean off, not cut or broken, ripped. Deep claw marks scored the remaining wood, but it was the tracks in the snow that made my skin crawl. They were footprints, but not quite human. Too big, maybe 18 inches long. 5 toes, but with claw marks at the tips. The stride was 8 feet between steps. I'd tracked plenty of bears, and this wasn't a bear. I'd tracked men too, and this sure wasn't a man. Whatever made these tracks walked upright and weighed at least 800 pounds, based on how deep they sank in the snow. The tracks led away from the farm toward the deep woods. Part of me wanted to head back to town right then, but I had a job to do, and 89 families over the years had counted on me to find their missing loved ones. I couldn't let fear stop me now. I followed the tracks as they wound through the trees. They led up steep hillsides that would challenge an experienced hiker, but whatever made them moved easily through the terrain. Sometimes the prints disappeared where the creature had walked on bare rock or fallen logs, but I always picked up the trail again. After 3 hours of tracking, I found something that made my blood run cold. In a clearing sheltered by tall pines, someone, or something, had built a shelter. Thick branches were woven together and covered with animal hides. It wasn't neat like a human would build, but it wasn't random like an animal's nest either. It showed intelligence, planning. I approached carefully, rifle ready. The smell hit me first. Raw meat, blood, and something else. Something rotten. Inside the shelter, I found things that shouldn't have been there. Torn pieces of clothing, a hiking boot with the laces still tied, a metal water bottle with teeth marks in it, and bones, lots of bones. Some were from animals, deer, rabbits, the missing livestock. But some were different, longer, shaped wrong. I'd seen enough skeletons in my time to recognize human remains when I saw them. That's when I remembered the missing hiker. 3 weeks ago, a young man named David Parker had vanished somewhere in this area. Search teams looked for 5 days but never found a trace of him. We figured he'd fallen in a stream and been washed downstream, or maybe found a cave and died of exposure. Looking at those bones with their strange gnaw marks, I knew we'd been wrong. The radio crackled in my pack. I pulled it out to call for backup, but all I got was static. The storm was moving in faster than predicted. Dark clouds rolled over the mountains, and the wind picked up. I should have left right then. Should have followed my own tracks back to safety while I still could. But I kept thinking about David Parker, about those 3 farm families, about my duty as a ranger. I decided to stay and keep watching, just until the storm passed. That was the biggest mistake of my life. By evening, snow was falling hard. Big, wet flakes that stuck to everything and made it impossible to see more than 20 feet in any direction. The wind howled through the trees like something alive and angry. I found a spot uphill from the creature's shelter where I could watch without being seen. Built myself a small windbreak out of fallen branches and settled in to wait. My grandfather had taught me patience was a hunter's best tool. As darkness fell, I heard something that raised every hair on my neck. Singing. It was a man's voice, weak and shaky, coming from somewhere down in the valley. The words were hard to make out through the wind, but it sounded like Amazing Grace. The voice kept stopping, like the singer was too tired to continue, then starting up again. My first thought was that David Parker was still alive down there, hurt and calling for help. I grabbed my rifle and emergency medical kit ready to go to him. But something made me stop. Maybe it was my military training, maybe it was instinct, but something felt wrong. The voice was coming from the direction of the creature's shelter, and it had been 3 weeks since David went missing. In this cold, without food or proper shelter, no man could survive that long. I listened more carefully. The singing was getting closer, and now I could hear footsteps crunching through the snow. Heavy steps, but trying to be quiet. "Help me," the voice called. "Please, somebody help me. I'm hurt real bad." It was definitely coming toward my hiding spot. Through the blowing snow, I saw a dark shape moving between the trees. Tall, much taller than a man should be. It walked upright but hunched over like its back was bent. "I can see your fire," the voice said. But I didn't have a fire. Hadn't dared light one for fear of being seen. The shape stopped about 30 feet away. Even through the snow, I could tell it was looking right at me. "Please don't hide from me," it said in that same weak, pleading voice. "I've been lost for so long. I'm so hungry." That's when I saw its eyes. They reflected light like an animal's, but they were too high off the ground. This thing was at least 9 feet tall. "My name is David Parker," it said. "I'm 23 years old. I live in Knoxville. Please help me." But the voice was wrong. Too deep, like it was coming from a barrel. And there were other sounds mixed in, clicks and growls that no human throat could make. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. My grandfather had taught me that most predators will move on if they don't see prey behavior. The thing tilted its head, listening. Snow collected on its shoulders, and I could see it wasn't wearing clothes. Its body was covered in matted fur. Its arms hung down past where its knees should be. "I know you're there," it said, and now the voice was different, deeper, angry. "I can smell you." It started moving again, circling my position. Each step was careful, deliberate. It was hunting. Come out," it called. But now it wasn't using David's voice anymore. It was using mine. My own voice, calling to me through the storm. Jack, where are you? It's okay, Jack. Everything's okay." Hearing my own voice coming from that thing nearly broke my nerve. I wanted to run, but I knew that was exactly what it wanted. Predators chase runners. So I waited. The circling continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes the thing would call out in different voices. David's, mine, even what sounded like a woman crying for help. But I didn't move. Finally, the sounds faded. The footsteps moved away, back toward the valley. But I knew it wasn't gone. It was just waiting, like I was. watching. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me grip my rifle tighter. Every shadow that moved in my peripheral vision could have been the creature coming back. The storm raged all around me, and somewhere in that storm, something that shouldn't exist was hunting. When morning came, the snow was 3 feet deep and still falling. My radio was completely dead. Either the battery had frozen or the storm was too strong. Either way, I was cut off. I should have started hiking out right then, but the snow was too deep and the visibility too poor. I'd get lost in minutes, and then I'd be easy prey. So I stayed put and tried to think like a soldier instead of a victim. First, I checked my supplies. Food for 2 more days if I was careful. Plenty of ammunition. Enough fuel for my camp stove to melt snow for water. I could survive if I stayed smart. Second, I studied what I knew about the enemy. It was big, strong, and intelligent. It could mimic human voices perfectly. It hunted at night, and it had developed a taste for human flesh. That last part was the most troubling. Normal animals, even predators, us, usually avoid humans unless they're desperate. But this thing was actively hunting people. That meant it was either starving or had learned that humans were easy prey. Around noon, I saw something that made my heart sink. Fresh tracks in the snow, leading from the valley up toward my position. The creature had been moving while I couldn't see it in the storm, and it was getting bolder. I packed my gear quickly and quietly. Time to find a better defensive position. As I moved through the woods, following a ridgeline that would eventually lead back toward the main trail, I found more evidence of the creature's presence. Trees with bark stripped off in long gouges, piles of bones that had been cracked open for the marrow, and more of those shelters, built in a rough circle like it was marking territory. This thing wasn't just passing through. It lived here. This was its hunting ground. That's when I realized the truth that should have been obvious from the start. The missing hiker, the dead livestock, the strange tracks. This had probably been going on for months, maybe years. We just hadn't connected the dots because we didn't want to believe something like this could exist. How many people had vanished in these mountains over the years? How many unexplained disappearances had we blamed on accidents or exposure? As if summoned by my thoughts, I heard the voice again. "Jack? Is that you, Jack?" This time it sounded like my ex-wife, Sarah. We'd divorced 2 years ago and she'd moved to Atlanta. There was no way she could be in these mountains, but the voice was perfect. Every inflection, every little catch in her throat when she was scared. If I hadn't seen the thing with my own eyes the night before, I might have believed it. "Jack, I'm hurt," the Sarah voice called. "I came looking for you when you didn't come home. Please, I think my leg is broken." The voice was coming, from behind me, back along the trail I'd just walked. The creature was following my tracks. I found a cluster of large rocks and took cover, rifle ready. Through the falling snow, I caught glimpses of movement. The thing was staying just out of clear sight, but I could see it was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "Why won't you help me?" the voice pleaded. "Don't you love me anymore?" It was using my memories against me, somehow knowing exactly what would hurt most. Sarah had asked me that same question the day she left, when my job as a ranger became more important to me than our marriage. But I knew it wasn't really Sarah. It was something pretending to be her, using her voice to lure me into the open. I raised my rifle and waited for a clear shot. The storm got worse as the day went on. Wind howled through the trees so loud I could barely hear myself think. Snow piled up everywhere, making every rock and fallen log look like a crouched figure waiting to pounce. But the creature didn't attack during daylight. It just kept circling, always staying just out of sight. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of dark fur moving between the trees. Other times I'd see those glowing eyes watching me from the shadows. But it never came close enough for a clear shot. It was smart, smarter than any animal I'd ever tracked. Around 3 in the afternoon, I found something that made my stomach turn. Half buried in the snow near a fallen tree, I discovered more human remains. But these were fresher than the ones in the shelter. Maybe a week old, judging by the frozen state of the flesh still clinging to the bones. Scattered around the remains were pieces of hiking gear, a torn backpack, a broken compass, a water bottle with a name written on it in permanent marker. Lisa Chen. I remembered Lisa. She was a college student from Memphis who'd come hiking alone despite warnings about the weather. We'd found her car at the trailhead 2 weeks ago, but never found her. The official report said she'd probably fallen through thin ice on one of the creeks. Looking at her bones, I could see that wasn't what happened. The bite marks were identical to the ones I'd found at the livestock kills, but these were on human bones, and some of them were big enough to have been made by jaws that could open wider than any normal animal. That's when I understood what I was really dealing with. This wasn't just some oversized bear or escaped zoo animal. This was something else entirely. Something that had learned humans were not only easy to catch, but good to eat. I said a quick prayer for Lisa and kept moving. The daylight was fading, and I needed to find a defensible position for the night. I found it in an old ranger cabin that had been abandoned for years. The roof was partly caved in and the windows were broken out, but the walls were solid log construction. More importantly, there was only one door, and I had a clear view in all directions. Inside, I found some old emergency supplies that previous rangers had left behind. Canned food, matches, a kerosene lantern. I also found a logbook where rangers had recorded their observations over the years. Flipping through the pages, I saw entries going back to the 1950s. Most were routine: weather observations, wildlife sightings, maintenance notes. But some entries made my blood run cold. October 1958. Found deer carcass near Cades Cove. Unusual predation pattern. Recommend investigation. March 1961. Local farmers report livestock kills. Tracks suggest large predator, possibly bear. Unable to locate. July 1962. Hiker reported being followed by large, hairy man near Thunderhead Mountain, assumed to be practical joke or misidentification. September 1963. Strange howling heard throughout park at night, not consistent with known wildlife vocalizations. Entry after entry, year after year. The signs had been there all along, but nobody had put the pieces together, or maybe they had, and decided it was better to keep quiet than start a panic. The last entry was dated just 3 months ago. November 1963. Recommend closure of backcountry trails during winter months. Unusual. Number of missing persons reports. Possible predator activity. That entry was signed by my predecessor, Ranger Tom Bradley. Tom had retired suddenly in December, claiming health problems. Now I wondered if the health problems were real, or if he'd seen something that made him want to get as far away from these mountains as possible. As darkness fell, I barricaded the cabin door with everything I could move: an old desk, chairs, even the wood-burning stove. I kept the lantern burning low and positioned myself where I could see out the broken windows in all directions. The creature came back just after sunset. I heard it before I saw it. Heavy footsteps crunching through the snow, circling the cabin. It was being more careful now, staying in the tree line where the shadows were deepest. Then the voices started again. First it was David Parker, pleading for help, then Lisa Chen, crying and saying she was cold, then my grandfather speaking in Cherokee and telling me to come outside. But the worst was when it used my father's voice. Dad had died in Korea when I was 8 years old, and hearing his voice again, even knowing it was fake, nearly broke my resolve. "Come on out, son," the thing said in Dad's warm, familiar drawl. "Don't be afraid. Daddy's here to take you home." I had to bite my lip until it bled to keep from responding. The creature was using my deepest emotions against me, somehow knowing exactly which memories would hurt the most. Around midnight, it tried a different approach. Instead of voices, it started throwing things at the cabin. First, just chunks of ice and small rocks. Then bigger objects. Logs, stones the size of basketballs. The walls shook with each impact. I knew it was testing the structure, looking for weak points. Sooner or later, it would find one. That's when I decided to go on the offensive. I had maybe 6 hours until dawn, if I went. As going to make a stand, it had to be on my terms, not the creature's. I couldn't just sit in the cabin and wait for it to find a way in. I loaded my rifle with my best ammunition, heavy grain bullets designed for elk hunting. If this thing was flesh and blood, these rounds would stop it. If it wasn't, well, I'd deal with that problem when I came to it. Moving as quietly as I could, I climbed out through the back window and circled around to where I'd last heard the creature moving. The snow was still falling, but not as hard. I could see maybe 50 feet in the pale moonlight. I followed its tracks, staying downwind so it couldn't smell me coming. My grandfather had taught me how to move silently through the woods, how to become part of the forest instead of fighting against it. The tracks led to a small clearing, where something incredible and terrifying was waiting for me. The creature was feeding. In the center of the clearing, it crouched over the body of a deer it had killed. But this wasn't normal predator behavior. The thing was eating with its hands, tearing off strips of flesh and swallowing them whole. Blood covered its fur and dripped into the snow. Up close, I could see what it really was. The basic shape was human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head on top of broad shoulders. But everything was wrong, stretched out and twisted like a funhouse mirror version of a person. It stood at least 9 feet tall with arms that reached almost to the ground. Its fingers ended in black claws 3 inches long. The head was the worst part. It was covered in coarse, dark hair, but underneath I could see features that might once have been human. The face was elongated, with a jutting jaw full of teeth designed for tearing meat. But the eyes held intelligence. Evil intelligence, but intelligence nonetheless. This wasn't just an animal. It was something that had once been human, or close to human, and had become something else. Something that had learned to hunt and kill and eat other people. As I watched, the creature suddenly stopped feeding and lifted its head. It sniffed the air, then turned to look directly at where I was hiding. "I know you're there, Jack," it said in a voice like gravel sliding down a mountainside. Not mimicking anyone else now, but speaking in its own horrible voice. "I can smell your fear." It stood up slowly, deer blood running down its chin. In the moonlight, I could see old scars crisscrossing its body. This thing had been in fights before and survived them all. "You taste good in my dreams," it continued, taking a step toward my hiding place. "Better than the others. You have strong meat, tough meat. I'm going to save you for last." That's when I realized it wasn't just hunting randomly. It had been studying me specifically, learning my habits and routines. How long had it been watching me work in these mountains? How many times had I hiked past its territory without knowing it was there? "The old Cherokee knew about us," the creature said, still moving closer. "They had stories. They knew to stay away from the deep woods when the hunger moon was full." I looked up through the trees and saw the moon shining bright and cold through the clouds. February's full moon. The Cherokee called it the hunger moon because it came during the hardest part of winter when game was scarce and people were most likely to starve. "But you white men don't listen to stories," the thing continued. "You build your houses where you don't belong. You walk in places that should be left alone. And when we take what we need to survive, you call us monsters." It was close enough now that I could smell its stench, rotting meat, wet fur, and something else that reminded me of an old tomb. I raised my rifle and fired. The bullet hit its center mass, right in the chest. The impact spun it around and sent it crashing into a tree. Black blood splattered the snow. But it didn't stay down. The creature rolled to its feet, ate within human speed, and let out a roar that echoed through the mountains. The sound was part human scream, part wolf howl, and part something I had no name for. It was the sound of pure rage and hunger. I fired again and again. Both shots hit their target, but the wounds seemed to close almost as fast as I made them. The black blood stopped flowing after just a few seconds. The thing charged. I dove to the side as it crashed through the spot where I'd been standing. Its claws raked across a tree trunk, leaving gouges 6 inches deep in the hard wood. If those claws had caught me, they would have torn me in half. I rolled through the snow and came up firing. This time I aimed for the head. The bullet creased its skull and sent it staggering, but again it recovered in seconds. "You can't kill what's already dead," it snarled, circling me now like a wolf getting ready to pounce. We died long ago in the cold and hunger, but we chose to keep living no matter the cost. That's when I understood. This thing had once been human, probably a Cherokee who had been caught in the mountains during a terrible winter. Faced with starvation, it had made a choice, to eat human flesh rather than die. And somehow, that choice had changed it into something else, something that couldn't die, but could never really live either. The creature lunged again. This time I was ready for it. I rolled backward and kicked up with both feet, catching it in the stomach and using its own momentum to flip it over my head. It crashed into the snow behind me, but before I could get to my feet, its hand closed around my ankle. Those claws dug through my boot and into flesh. Pain shot up my leg as it dragged me toward its waiting jaws. I still had the rifle. I jammed the barrel against the creature's wrist and pulled the trigger. The point-blank shot blew its hand apart, freeing me but using up my next. Last bullet. The creature howled again and clutched its ruined wrist to its chest. Black blood poured between its fingers, but I could already see the wound starting to close. I scrambled away and reloaded with my last bullet. Just one shot left, and I had to make it count. "Fire," I whispered, remembering something from the old Cherokee stories my grandfather used to tell. The old spirits fear fire. I still had my emergency flares in my pack. If bullets couldn't kill this thing, maybe fire could hurt it enough to drive it away. The creature was recovering from its injury, shaking its head like a dog throwing off water. In seconds, it would charge again. I pulled out a flare and struck it against the ignition strip. Red light blazed through the clearing as the flare burst to life. The effect on the creature was immediate. It screamed and backed away, covering its eyes with its good hand. The smell of burning sulfur from the flare seemed to cause it physical pain. "Stay back," I shouted, waving the flare between us. "Stay back or I'll burn you alive." But the flare would only last a few minutes, and I only had 3 more in my pack. The creature snarled but kept its distance. "You cannot burn forever, Ranger Man, and I can wait. I have all the time in the world." I backed toward the edge of the clearing, keeping the flare between us. Behind me was a steep slope that led down to a frozen creek. If I could get to the water, maybe I could find a way to escape. But the creature was thinking the same thing. It began moving to cut off my retreat, despite the flare keeping it at bay. That's when I made my final gambit. I had one chance, and it depended on something I'd noticed during our fight. The creature avoided the brightest part of the flare's light. Not just the flame itself, but the light it cast. "You know what you are," I said, backing slowly toward the slope. "You remember being human once. Part of you is still in there, isn't it? Part of you knows this is wrong." The creature's eyes flickered, and for just a moment I saw something that might have been pain. "Hungry," it whispered. "So hungry. For so long." "It doesn't have to be this way," I continued. "You can choose to stop. You can choose to rest." "Cannot rest," it snarled. "Cannot die. Must feed. Must survive." I was at the edge of the slope now. 20 feet below, the frozen creek reflected moonlight like a ribbon of silver. If I jumped, I might break my legs on the ice. If I stayed, the creature would tear me apart as soon as the flare burned out. "Yes, you can," I said. "You can choose." I threw the flare as hard as I could, right at the creature's feet. It screamed and jumped backward as the flame landed in the snow beside it. In that moment of distraction, I took my shot. But I didn't aim at the creature. Instead, I aimed at the flare. The bullet hit the flare's chemical core, and it exploded in a burst of fire that spread across the snow-covered ground. The creature found itself standing in the middle of a circle of burning chemicals, trapped by the one thing it truly feared. It thrashed and howled, looking for an escape route. But every direction led through fire. For a moment, I thought I had won. Then the creature looked directly at me with those intelligent, hate-filled eyes. "If I burn," it said in a voice like breaking glass, "I burn alone." It charged straight through the flames. Its fur caught fire immediately. Within seconds, it was a living torch stumbling toward me. But it kept coming, even as the fire consumed it. I had no choice. I jumped. The fall down the slope seemed to last forever. I hit the ice hard, felt something snap in my shoulder, and rolled into the darkness beside the creek bank. Above me, I could hear the creature's death screams echoing through the mountains. The smell of burning flesh drifted down on the wind. Then silence. I lay in the snow for a long time, too hurt and too exhausted to move. My shoulder was definitely broken, and my ankle where the creature had grabbed me was bleeding badly. But I was alive. When I finally managed to climb back up the slope, I found the clearing empty except for a large patch of melted snow and some black stains on the ground. No body, no bones. Just the lingering smell of sulfur and burned meat. I never found any trace of the creature's remains, though I searched for hours. Either it had been completely consumed by the fire, or it had somehow survived and crawled away to die somewhere else. The storm ended the next morning. A search party found me 2 days later, half dead from exposure and blood loss. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from frostbite, a broken collarbone, and infected claw marks. The official report blamed David Parker's disappearance on a fall through thin ice. Lisa Chen's death was listed as exposure and possible animal predation. The livestock kills were attributed to a pack of feral dogs that had since moved on to other hunting grounds. Nobody believed my story about the creature. The doctors thought the trauma and cold had caused hallucinations. My supervisors suggested I take early retirement due to psychological stress from extended wilderness exposure. So I transferred to a park in Florida, where the worst thing you might encounter is an angry alligator. I never worked in mountain country again. But sometimes late at night I still get calls from other rangers. They tell me about strange tracks found after heavy snows, about livestock killed in ways that don't make sense, about hikers who vanish without a trace, leaving behind only torn clothing and bones with unusual bite marks. And I tell them all the same thing. File your report, do your job, but don't go looking for what made those tracks. Some things are better left alone. Because I know the truth. I know that creature wasn't the only one of its kind. Somewhere in the deep woods, in the places where hungry people once made terrible choices to survive, others are still waiting, still hunting, still feeding during the long coat. Geld nights when the hunger moon is full. I keep emergency flares in my desk drawer now, even here in Florida, just in case, because you never know when something that should be dead might decide it's still hungry. My name is Margaret Bell, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger for 12 years now, working in the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. When I first started this job back in 1964, I was the only woman ranger in the whole forest. The men didn't think I could handle it, but I proved them wrong every single day. I grew up in these mountains. My daddy used to tell me stories about our family name, the Bell family. He'd say we were related to the famous Bells from Adams, the ones with the witch. I never believed those old tales. Mountain folk love their ghost stories, and the Bell Witch was just the most famous one. People said she haunted the Bell family back in the 1800s, but I figured it was all made up. Just superstition to explain bad luck and strange happenings. At 34 years old, I thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, illegal hunters. I handled them all. My job was to keep people safe and protect the forest. I took that seriously. Real seriously. The trouble started in July of 1976. It was hot that summer, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and the trees droop. I was sitting in the ranger station when the phone rang. It was my boss, Chief Ranger Thompson. "Maggie," he said, "we got a problem down near Adams. 3 families have complained about something attacking their campsites." "What kind of attacks?" I asked, grabbing my notepad. "Strange ones. They say someone or something is throwing their gear around, pulling tent stakes right out of the ground. One family had their campfire scattered in the middle of the night, but they didn't see anybody." I wrote it down, but it sounded like teenagers playing pranks. Could be local kids causing trouble. That's what I thought too, but here's the weird part. All 3 families said the same thing. They felt like something was watching them. Something angry. And Maggie, they specifically asked for you. "For me? Why?" Thompson cleared his throat. Well, your last name is Bell. They figure maybe you'd understand what's happening better than the rest of us. I almost laughed. Chief, you don't really believe in that old witch story, do you? Course not, but these folks do. And if it makes them feel better to have a Bell looking into it, then that's what we'll do. Besides, you know that area better than anyone. He was right about that. I'd hiked every trail around Adams since I was a kid. If someone was causing trouble in my woods, I'd find them and put a stop to it. I packed my gear that afternoon: flashlight, radio, first aid kit, and my tape recorder. I always brought the recorder on investigations. Documentation was important, and sometimes you heard things in the woods that needed explaining later. The drive to Adams took about an hour. The closer I got, the more the landscape changed. The trees grew thicker, older. Spanish moss hung from the branches like old curtains. Even in broad daylight, the forest felt darker here. Quieter, too, like the animals were holding their breath. I met with the first family at their campsite, the Johnsons from Nashville, Mom, Dad, and 2 kids. Their campsite looked like a tornado had hit it. Tent stakes were pulled clean out and thrown 20 feet away. Their cooler was upside down, food scattered everywhere. It happened around midnight, Mr. Johnson told me. His hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette. We heard this sound, like someone walking around our tent, but when I looked outside, nobody was there. Then our tent started shaking, Mrs. Johnson added. Not from wind. There wasn't any wind. It shook like someone was grabbing the corners and yanking on them. Their 8-year-old daughter tugged on my uniform. The lady was mad, she whispered. What lady, honey? The one who was throwing our stuff. She was really, really mad. I took notes, but kids have big imaginations. Still, the damage to their campsite was real. Someone had done this, and they'd used a lot of force. The other 2 families told similar stories: equipment thrown around, invisible footsteps, the feeling of being watched by something full of hate. All the incidents happened between 11 at night and 3 in the morning. By evening, I'd interviewed everyone and examined all 3 campsites. The damage was extensive, but I still figured it was human troublemakers, maybe using some kind of equipment to stay hidden. I decided to camp in the area myself that night. If someone was playing games in my forest, I'd catch them red-handed. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast, too fast for July. I set up my tent near where the first attack happened and settled in to wait. The forest around me was dead quiet. No crickets, no owls, no rustling leaves. Just silence that pressed against my ears like cotton. That's when I knew something was really wrong. I've spent thousands of nights in these woods, and they're never completely quiet. There's always something moving, some sound of life. But this silence was different. It felt like the whole forest was afraid to make noise. Around 10:30, my radio crackled to life. Static filled the air, then a voice came through. Old, scratchy, and definitely not from dispatch. Well, look who's come home at last. I grabbed the radio. This is Ranger Bell. Who is this? You're on an emergency frequency. More static, then laughter. Cold, mean laughter that made my skin crawl. Emergency? Child, you don't know what an emergency is yet. But you will. The voice was a woman's with a thick mountain accent. It sounded old-fashioned, like people talked 100 years ago. Identify yourself immediately, or I'm reporting this to the authorities. Authorities? The voice cackled. I am the authority here. I am Kate Bell, and you're trespassing on my land. My blood went cold. Kate Bell was the name of the Bell Witch from the old stories. Someone was playing a very sick joke. Listen, whoever you are, this harassment stops now. These are public lands, and... Public! The voice turned angry, so angry the radio speakers vibrated. This land was soaked with my blood, watered with my tears. Every tree, every rock, every patch of dirt belongs to me. The radio went dead. Complete silence again. I sat there for a minute, heart pounding. Someone with a radio was messing with me, trying to scare me with local legends. Well, I wasn't some tourist who'd run screaming at the first ghost story. But then, the temperature dropped again. I could see my breath in the air, even though it had been 80 degrees an hour ago. Frost started forming on my tent in July in Tennessee. That's when I heard the footsteps. Heavy boots walking around my campsite. Slow, deliberate steps like someone taking their time, looking me over. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap. "Hello? Who's out there?" The footsteps stopped. I shined my light in a circle around the camp, but saw nothing. No person, no animal, nothing that could have made those sounds. But in the dirt around my tent, clear as day, were boot prints. Old-fashioned boots with a strange pattern on the sole. I followed the prints with my flashlight. They made a complete circle around my tent, then stopped at a big oak tree about 10 feet away. But here's what made my hands shake. The prints didn't go anywhere else. They didn't come from anywhere, and they didn't leave. They just started at the tree and ended at the tree. "Show yourself," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know you're out there." The answer came from right behind me. "I'm right here, child." I spun around and came face to face with nothing. But I felt breath on my face, cold breath that smelled like dirt and decay. And I heard that voice again, clear as if someone was standing inches away. "You look just like your great-great-grandmother. She was a pretty little thing, too." Before I finished with her, stumbled backward, falling over my own feet. This wasn't possible. People don't just vanish. Voices don't come from empty air. "What do you want?" I whispered. "Justice," the voice hissed. "Revenge. What I've always wanted. What I've been waiting for." My camping gear started moving. My backpack slid across the ground by itself. My sleeping bag unrolled and rolled back up again. My camp stove lifted into the air and hung there, spinning slowly. "Stop it!" I yelled. "Stop this right now!" Everything dropped to the ground at once. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Heavier, like something big was holding its breath. I waited for what felt like hours, but nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I dozed off in my tent. I woke up just before dawn to find a message written in the frost on my tent. Letters 2 inches tall, crystal clear. "Go home or join them." Below the message were names scratched into the frost, names I recognized from old family stories. Bell family names from the 1800s, all the people the witch had supposedly killed. At the bottom of the list in fresh letters was my name, Margaret Bell. I packed up my gear with shaking hands. This had gone way beyond pranks or coincidences. Something was happening here, something I couldn't explain with logic or training, but I couldn't just run away. I was a park ranger. These woods were my responsibility, and people were in danger. I drove back to the station as the sun came up, but I couldn't get that voice out of my head. The way she'd said my great-great-grandmother was pretty before I finished with her. The way she'd known things about my family that nobody alive should know. I spent the morning in the station library, digging through old books and records. I found what I was looking for in a collection of Tennessee folklore from 1894, the Bell Witch story, told by P.E. Opal, who claimed they'd lived through it. According to the book, Kate Bell wasn't a Bell at all. She was Kate Batts, a neighbor who'd had a land dispute with the Bell family. She claimed they'd cheated her out of her property, ruined her reputation, and driven her to poverty. She died cursing the Bell name, swearing she'd have revenge on every generation until the family line ended. The book described exactly what I'd experienced. Invisible footsteps, objects moving by themselves, a voice that came from nowhere. It also described how the witch had killed several Bell family members before finally disappearing in the 1820s. But according to the old stories, she'd promised to return someday to finish what she started. As I read, my radio crackled again. Same static, same old voice. "Enjoying your reading, child? Learning about your family history?" I keyed the mic. "What happened to Kate Batts? What turned her into this?" "Your precious Bell family happened to me. Stole my land, called me a liar, made me an outcast. I died alone and broken while they prospered. But death ain't the end of everything, as you're about to learn. That was over 150 years ago. I had nothing to do with it. You carry their blood. You carry their guilt. and you're going to pay their debt." The radio went dead again, but this time I was ready. I had work to do. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could find about Kate Batts and the Bell family. The more I learned, the worse I felt. The historical records painted a clear picture. Kate Batts had been cheated, lied about, and destroyed by my ancestors. They'd taken advantage of a woman with no husband to protect her, and when she fought back, they'd spread rumors that she was a witch. She died in poverty, alone, swearing revenge on the Bell name forever. But research wouldn't help the family still camping in those woods. Every night brought new reports of supernatural attacks. People's tents were being shredded while they slept inside. Campfires were being scattered, burning embers thrown at children. One man claimed invisible hands had grabbed him and thrown him 15 feet into a tree. I had to go back. This time I brought backup. Ranger Tom Martinez, a good man who'd worked with me for 5 years. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in me, and he could see I was scared. "Maggie, you look like you haven't slept in days," he said as we hiked into the Adams area. "I haven't. Not really." I told him everything, the voice on the radio, the moving equipment, the frost message. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Most men would have started explaining why I was wrong before I finished talking. "So what's the plan?" he asked when I was done. "Document everything. If Kate Batts wants to show herself, we'll have proof. If it's someone playing games, we'll catch them. And if it really is a ghost? Then we figure out how to stop her." We set up camp as the sun went down. Tom had brought extra equipment, cameras with night vision, electromagnetic field detectors, and temperature gauges. If something supernatural was happening, we'd have scientific proof. The attack started at 11:17 p.m. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in less than a minute. Our breath came out in white puffs and frost started forming on everything. The electromagnetic detector started beeping rapidly, its needles spinning like crazy. "Jesus," Tom whispered, staring at the readings. "Maggie, this equipment is going haywire." That's when the voice came back, but this time it wasn't on the radio. It came from everywhere at once, surrounding us like we were inside a giant speaker. "Brought a friend, did you? Good. I can deal with 2 as easy as 1. Tom grabbed his camera and started filming. "Show yourself. If you're real, prove it." The laughter that followed made both of us cover our ears. It was so loud, so full of hatred that it seemed to shake the trees. "Proof? You want proof?" Every piece of equipment we'd brought lifted into the air. Cameras, radios, food, sleeping bags. Everything floated around us in a slow circle about 6 feet off the ground. Tom kept filming, even though his camera was floating away from him. "This is impossible," he breathed. "Nothing's impossible when you've had 150 years to perfect your hatred," the voice replied. The floating equipment started spinning faster. Then it all came crashing down at once, landing in a perfect circle around us. But we weren't hurt. Kate wanted us scared, not dead. Not yet. "Now," the voice continued, "let me tell you about your precious Bell family." What happened next, I can barely describe. Images flashed in front of my eyes. Not like watching a movie, but like I was really there. I saw Kate Batts as she'd been in life, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and calloused hands. I watched as my ancestor John Bell cheated her in a land deal. Saw him spread lies about her when she tried to fight back. Watched as the community turned against her, calling her names, making her an outcast. I felt her loneliness, her desperation, her growing rage as she realized no one would help her. I experienced her death, cold, alone, cursing the Bell name with her last breath. And I felt the moment she returned from the grave, transformed by pure hatred into something that could move objects with thought and speak without a body. "Now you understand," Kate's voice whispered in my ear. "Your family destroyed me, made me into this thing, and I've spent more than a century planning my revenge." Tom was experiencing the same visions. I could see it in his face, the horror, the disbelief, the growing understanding that we were dealing with something far beyond normal. "What do you want?" I managed to ask. "All the Bell descendants gone, every last one, starting with you." The ground beneath my feet started shaking. Not an earthquake. This was focused, controlled. Cracks appeared in the dirt, spreading out from where I stood like a spider web. "You can run," Kate continued, "but I'll find you. I'll find every Bell who carries the family blood, and I'll make them pay for what was done to me." "How many are left?" Tom asked. His voice was steady, professional. Even faced with the impossible, he was thinking like a ranger. "Dozens, maybe hundreds, scattered across the country, living their comfortable lives, never knowing they carry the guilt of their ancestors." The cracks in the ground were getting wider. I could see down into darkness, could smell damp earth and decay. "But you're here now, Margaret Bell. The first one brave enough to face me directly. That deserves consideration." Everything stopped. The shaking, the cold, even the electromagnetic readings went back to normal. The sudden quiet was almost worse than the supernatural chaos. "I'll make you a deal," Kate said, her voice softer now but no less frightening. "Help me find the others. Help me complete my revenge. Do that, and I'll let you live to see it finished." "Never," I said immediately. "Then you'll die with them. And after you're gone, I'll find them anyway. Your death will just be meaningless instead of meaningful." More images flashed in my mind. Faces of people I'd never seen but somehow knew were family. Distant relatives living normal lives, unaware that a vengeful spirit was hunting them. Kids, grandparents, young parents with babies, all marked for death because of something that happened before they were born. "Think about it," Kate whispered. "You have until tomorrow night to decide. Help me, or join the list of names I scratch in the frost." The presence lifted like a weight being removed from my chest. Tom and I sat there in the sudden normal night, surrounded by our scattered equipment, trying to process what had just happened. "Did we really just—" Tom started. "Yeah, we did." He looked at his camera. "Did it record?" I checked the faucets, the tape recorder I always carried. The whole conversation was there, clear as day, proof that something impossible was happening in these woods. "Maggie, what are you going to do?" I looked around at the forest that had been my home for 34 years. Tomorrow night, I'd have to make a choice that would determine not just my fate, but the fate of dozens of innocent people. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I have to think of something. Kate Batts might have a right to be angry, but murder isn't justice. It's just more evil." As we packed up our damaged equipment, I kept thinking about those visions. Kate had been wronged, terribly wronged. But somewhere in the century and a half since her death, her righteous anger had twisted into something monstrous. The question was, could it be twisted back? I spent the next day in the town library reading everything I could find about Kate Batts. Not the ghost stories, but the real historical records. What I found broke my heart. Kate hadn't been a witch. She'd been a widow trying to survive in a world that gave women no rights. When my ancestor John Bell cheated her out of her land, she'd had no legal way to fight back. The courts wouldn't listen to a woman's word against a man's, so she'd done the only thing she could. She'd spoken out publicly, called him a liar and a cheat. In response, John Bell had destroyed her reputation. He'd spread rumors that she was unstable, dangerous, a witch. In a superstitious community, those accusations were as good as a death sentence. No one would do business with her, speak to her, or help her. She'd died alone, broken, and bitter. But the really heartbreaking part was what I found in her own words. A letter she'd written to her sister before she died. In it, she admitted that she was losing her mind from the isolation and grief. She wrote about the dreams of revenge that consumed her nights, the hatred that was eating her alive. "I fear I'm becoming the monster they say I am," she'd written. "The anger is all I have left, and I'm afraid to let it go, because then I'd have nothing at all." She'd been a victim who'd become a predator. Injustice had twisted her into the very thing her enemies had falsely accused her of being. As the sun set, I drove back to the Adams area alone. Tom had wanted to come with me, but this was something I had to face by myself. It was my family's debt, my responsibility. I didn't set up a tent this time. I just sat on a fallen log in the same clearing where Kate had first spoken to me and waited. She came with the darkness, and this time I could see her. She looked exactly like she had in my visions, middle-aged, wearing a simple dress from the 1800s. But her face was different. The kind eyes were gone, replaced by something cold and hungry. Death and decades of hatred had changed her into something that barely remembered being human. "Have you made your decision, child?" she asked. Her voice sounded normal now, like a real person talking, which somehow made it worse. "I have. But first, I want to understand something. In life, you were fighting for justice. What you're doing now, this isn't justice. This is just passing on the hurt that was done to you." Kate's expression darkened. "Those Bell family members living their comfortable lives. They've prospered from what was stolen from me. My land, my reputation, my life. They owe me a debt. They weren't even born when you were wronged. You're talking about killing innocent people for something their ancestors did." "Innocent?" Kate laughed. But it wasn't the terrible sound from before. It was sadder, more bitter. Were the children I never got to have innocent? Was the life I never got to live innocent? Why should they get what was stolen from me? I could see the pain underneath her anger, the loneliness, the grief, the desperate need for someone to acknowledge what had been done to her. She didn't really want to kill my relatives. She wanted someone to care that she'd been destroyed. "You're right," I said quietly. "What happened to you was wrong, completely wrong. My ancestor was a coward and a cheat, and you deserved better. You deserved justice." Kate stared at me, suspicion and hope warring in her ghostly features. "But killing innocent people won't bring you justice. It'll just make you into the monster they said you were. Is that really what you want? To prove John Bell was right about you?" For a moment, Kate flickered like a candle flame. When she solidified again, she looked more human, more like the woman from my visions. "Then what?" she whispered. "What do I do with all this pain? Where do I put all this anger? It's all I am now. If I let it go, I'll just disappear." "Maybe disappearing isn't the worst thing. Maybe it's finally getting to rest." "Rest?" Kate shook her head. "I can't rest. Not while the injustice stands. Not while nobody remembers what was done to me." That's when I understood what she really needed. What if they did remember? What if people knew the truth about what happened to you? I told her my plan. Instead of revenge, what if we worked together to set the historical record straight? I could use my position with the Park Service to get a memorial erected, telling the real story of Kate Batts. Not the ghost stories, but the truth, that she'd been a victim of injustice who died alone and forgotten. "People would remember you as you really were," I said. "A woman who tried to stand up for herself in a world that wouldn't listen. They'd know that Kate Batts was wronged, and they'd remember." Kate was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, more like the woman she'd been in life. "You'd do that? Even though I threatened your family?" "Because you threatened my family. I understand now why you're angry. And I think maybe you need one to be angry on your behalf instead of just being angry yourself." For the first time since she'd appeared, Kate smiled. It transformed her face, making her look almost alive again. "You're not like the other Bells," she said. "Maybe that's because I've been where you were, fighting for respect in a world run by men, trying to prove I belonged when everyone said I didn't. I know what it feels like to be dismissed and ignored just because of who you are." Kate nodded slowly. "The anger does get heavy after a while." "Then put it down. Let me carry some of it for you." Kate looked around the forest that had been her prison for over a century. "If I let go, if I stop fighting, will anyone remember that I was here?" "I will, and I'll make sure others do too." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath she didn't need. When she opened them again, they were the kind eyes from my visions. "All right, Margaret Bell. All right." The change was immediate. The unnatural cold lifted. The oppressive feeling of hatred that had filled these woods faded away, For the first time since I'd started investigating, the forest felt normal. Kate was fading too, becoming translucent as the anger that had anchored her to the world finally released its hold. "Thank you," she whispered as she disappeared. "Thank you for seeing me." And then she was gone, and I was alone in the woods with just the normal sounds of night creatures and wind in the trees. It took me 6 months to get the memorial approved. Park bureaucracy moved slowly, and I had to fight for every word that went on that plaque. But eventually, it was installed at the edge of the Adams area, where campers would see it and understand the history of the land they were visiting. The memorial reads, "In memory of Kate Batts, 1750 to 1821, a widow who fought for justice in a world that would not listen. Cheated of her land and destroyed by false accusations, she died alone and forgotten. We remember her courage in standing up for what was right, and we acknowledge the injustice she suffered. May her story remind us that every person deserves dignity, respect, and fair treatment under the law." I've been back to those woods many times since then. The supernatural attacks stopped completely after that night. Families camp there safely now, though sometimes they ask about the memorial and the woman it honors. I always tell them the truth, that Kate Batts was a real person who was wronged, and that remembering the injustices of the past helps us do better in the future. But I don't tell them everything, because sometimes on quiet nights when I'm patrolling those woods alone, I feel a presence walking beside me, not angry or threatening, just peaceful, like someone keeping me company on my rounds. And once, just once, when I was having a particularly hard day dealing with a sexist supervisor who thought women shouldn't be rangers, I found a message written in the morning dew on my truck windshield. "Stay strong. Some fights are worth having. K." I never saw Kate Batts again, but I know she's still there sometimes. Not as a vengeful spirit, but as a reminder that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it just takes the right person at the right time to finally set things right. The Bell Witch legend continues to draw tourists to Adams, Tennessee. They come looking for ghost stories and supernatural thrills. But the real story, the story of Kate Batts, is more important than any legend. It's a reminder that our actions have consequences that can last for generations, and that sometimes the dead need the living to speak for them. I retired from the Park Service last year, but I still live near those woods. I've become something of a local historian, collecting stories about the area and the people who lived here. I make sure that the real Kate Batts, not the witch of legend, but the woman who fought for justice, is never forgotten again. Because everyone deserves to be remembered for who they really were, not for what others said about them. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear her voice on the breeze. No longer angry or demanding revenge, but simply saying what she never got to say in life. Thank you for listening. That's enough. It's finally enough. My name is Vincent Galloway, but everyone just calls me Vince. I've been working for the Forest Service here in West Virginia for 20 years now, taking care of Monongahela National Forest. Before that, I spent 8 years in the Air Force working with radar equipment. I know what normal looks like, and I know when something's wrong. People around Point Pleasant still remember me as the kid who lived through the Silver Bridge collapse back in 1967. I was only 14 then, walking home from school when I heard that awful sound, metal screaming like it was alive and in pain. 46 people died that day. I still dream about it sometimes. That's part of why I took this job. Out here in the forest, away from big bridges and busy roads, I thought I'd found peace. April 1985 was weird from the start. Spring came too early that year, and the snow melted too fast. The Cheat River and all the smaller streams were running high and angry, washing out roads and putting stress on every bridge in the forest. My boss, Jim Harrison, called me into his office on a Monday morning with a stack of reports and a worried look. "Vince, I need you to check every single bridge on the forest roads," he said, sliding the papers across his desk. "We've got 3 that are showing problems, and I want them all inspected before we open the recreational areas for summer." I nodded and picked up the files. Bridge inspection was part of my job, and I was good at it. My Air Force training taught me to look for details other people missed. I could spot a stress crack or loose bolt from 50 yards away. "How bad are we talking?" I asked. Jim rubbed his forehead. "Bad enough that I'm losing sleep. The spring floods hit us harder than we thought. I need you to document everything. Take pictures, measure any damage, write detailed reports. If any of these bridges aren't safe, we close them immediate." Lie. I spent that morning loading up my truck with equipment. My camera, one of those new Polaroid models that spits out pictures right away, went in first, along with measuring tools, my clipboard, and my radio. The radio was important out here. Cell phones were still a rich man's toy in 1985, and the forest could swallow you up if you got in trouble with no way to call for help. The first bridge on my list was the Cheat River crossing, about 15 miles into the forest on a road that led to some popular camping spots. I'd driven over it hundreds of times, but when I got out of my truck that morning and really looked at it, something felt wrong. The bridge was old, built in the 1950s, but it had always seemed solid. Now, standing at the edge, looking down at the water 30 feet below, I could see problems. The concrete supports had cracks running through them like spider webs. The metal railings were loose in places. But what bothered me most was how quiet it was. Usually, this part of the forest was full of life. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. Today, the only sound was water rushing under the bridge. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. I got my camera out and started taking pictures of the damage. When the first Polaroid developed, I almost dropped it. There was the bridge, clear as day, with all the cracks and problems I'd seen. But there was something else in the picture. A dark shape perched on top of the bridge's center support, like a huge bird or bat. I looked up at the bridge. Nothing there. I took another picture. Same thing. The dark shape was there in the photo, but nowhere to be seen when I looked with my own eyes. My hands started shaking a little as I wrote notes on my clipboard. Maybe it was just a shadow or a problem with the camera, but something deep in my gut was telling me this was just the beginning. As I packed up my equipment, my radio crackled to life with static and what sounded like clicking noises, almost like Morse code. But I'd learned Morse code in the Air Force, and this wasn't any signal I recognized. It was random, desperate, like something trying to communicate but not knowing how. I drove away from that bridge with my heart beating too fast and a headache starting behind my eyes. 2 more bridges to inspect, and something told me they were going to be even worse. The second bridge was near Blackwater Falls, one of the most beautiful spots in the whole forest. Tourists came from all over to see the water tumble 60 feet down into the gorge, and the bridge gave them a perfect view. But when I got there that afternoon, I understood why no tourists were around. The bridge looked like something had tried to tear it apart. I'd seen flood damage before, but this was different. The metal beams were twisted in ways that didn't make sense. Some of them looked like they'd been grabbed and bent by giant hands. The wooden deck had boards missing, leaving holes big enough to fall through. And the smell. There was a sharp electric smell in the air, like right before a lightning storm. I parked my truck and walked to the edge of the bridge, testing each step. The whole structure shook under my weight, creaking and groaning like it was in pain. Through the gaps in the deck, I could see the falls far below, the water white and angry as it crashed on the rocks. The silence here was even worse than at the first bridge. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of small animals moving through the bushes. Just the roar of the waterfall and the wind whistling through the broken bridge. I started taking pictures again, documenting every crack, every loose bolt, every missing board. But when I looked at the developed photos, my blood turned cold. In every single picture, the same dark shape appeared, sometimes perched on the bridge railings, sometimes seeming to hover in midair above the gorge. This time, I could make out more details. It looked like a perstas, on, but wrong, too tall, with arms that were too long, and what I thought might be wings folded against its back. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the bridge carefully. Nothing, just twisted metal and broken wood. My radio started acting up again, cycling through different frequencies on its own. Between bursts of static, I heard what sounded like voices, not clear enough to understand, but urgent and frightened. Then came that clicking sound again, faster now, almost frantic. I was writing notes when the headache hit me like a hammer. Sharp, stabbing pain right behind my eyes, worse than any headache I'd ever had. For a few seconds, my vision went blurry and I had to grab the truck door to keep from falling down. When my sight cleared, I saw movement on the bridge. It was just for a second, something large and dark shifting position near the center of the span. When I looked directly at it, nothing was there. But out of the corner of my eye, I kept seeing it move. I forced myself to finish the inspection, measuring the damage and taking more photos. Every picture showed the same dark figure, sometimes in different positions, always watching. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely write, and the headache was getting worse. As I packed up to leave, I heard something that made my heart skip. It sounded like wings. Big ones, like a goose or eagle, but much louder. The sound came from above the bridge, but when I looked up, the sky was empty. Then, clear as a bell, I heard a voice inside my head. Not through my ears, actually inside my head like my own thoughts, but not my own voice. Danger. Bridge falls. People die. I spun around, looking for whoever had spoken, but I was alone. The voice came again, sad and urgent. Soon, very soon, you must warn them. Who's there? I called out, feeling foolish but scared enough not to care. What do you want? No answer. Just the wind and the waterfall, and my own heart beating so hard I thought it might burst. I got in my truck and drove away as fast as I dared on the twisting forest road. In my rear view mirror, I could swear I saw something large and winged rise up from the bridge and circle overhead, following me for almost a mile before disappearing into the trees. When I got back to the ranger station, Jim took one look at my face and poured me a cup of coffee with shaking hands. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said. I wanted to tell him everything, about the photos, the voices, the shape I kept seeing. But how could I explain something I didn't understand myself? Instead, I just handed him my report and photos. Both bridges need to be closed immediately, I said. They're not safe. Jim looked through the pictures, frowning at the damage. If he noticed the dark shape that appeared in every photo, he didn't say anything. This is bad, Vince. Really bad. But I've got one more bridge I need you to check tomorrow. The old logging bridge over Devil's Canyon. After that, we'll make our decisions. I nodded, but inside I was dreading what I might find at that third bridge. Something was trying to warn me about danger, and I had a terrible feeling that tomorrow I'd find out what it was. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those twisted metal beams and heard that voice in my head. People die. Very soon. The Devil's Canyon Bridge was the oldest and most remote of the three, built back in the 1940s for logging trucks. Now it was mainly used by hunters and hikers who wanted to reach the deepest parts of the forest. It was 15 miles from the nearest ranger station, down a dirt road that barely deserved the name. I loaded my truck with extra equipment that morning: flares, rope, my emergency first aid kit. Something told me I was going to need them. The drive took almost an hour, winding through thick forest where the trees grew so close together they blocked out most of the sky. When I finally reached the bridge, I sat in my truck for a long moment, staring. Devil's Canyon was deep, almost 100 feet from the bridge to the rocky bottom. The bridge itself was a simple steel beam design, built tough to handle heavy logging equipment. But like the others, it showed signs of damage that didn't make sense. The steel beams had cracks that zigzagged through them like lightning bolts. The wooden decks sagged in places, and several support cables were hanging loose, swaying in the breeze like dead snakes. But the strangest thing was the pattern of the damage. It looked deliberate, like something had carefully weakened specific points to make the bridge fail in exactly the right way. I got out of my truck and immediately felt that same wrongness I'd experienced at the other bridges. The forest around Devil's Canyon was completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of small animals in the bushes. The air smelled of electricity and something else. something wild and animal-like. As I walked toward the bridge, my radio came to life without me touching it. This time, instead of static and clicking, I heard voices, faint but clear enough to understand. Bridge inspection. Structural failure imminent. Evacuate immediately. The voices sounded like emergency dispatchers, but that was impossible. My radio wasn't tuned to any emergency frequency, and anyway, there was no disaster to dispatch anyone to. Yet. I started taking pictures, and right away I could see the dark figure in the viewfinder. This time it wasn't hiding or barely visible. It was standing right in the middle of the bridge, clear as day. I lowered the camera and looked with my naked eyes. Nothing there. Raised the camera again. There it was, standing perfectly still, facing me. I took the picture. When it developed, my hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The figure was clearer than ever before, defined, nightly human-shaped but wrong in every detail. Too tall, easily 7 or 8 feet, arms that hung down past its knees, and what looked like massive wings folded against its back, leathery and bat-like. But the worst part was the eyes. Even in the blurry Polaroid, I could see they were glowing, bright red, like coals in a fire. The headache hit me again, worse than before. For a moment, the world spun, and I had to sit down hard on the ground, clutching my head. And in that moment of pain and confusion, the voice came back. Not just in my head this time, I could hear it in the air around me, like someone whispering from every direction at once. Vincent Galloway, Silver Bridge survivor. You know what happens when bridges fall. Who are you? I gasped, struggling to stand up. What do you want? I am the warning that comes before disaster. I tried to warn them before, at Silver Bridge. Few listened. Many died. Suddenly, images flooded my mind. Not my own memories, but visions that felt more real than reality. I saw the Silver Bridge in 1967. Saw that same dark figure perched on the towers in the days before the collapse. Saw it trying to warn people, trying to make them understand, but nobody listening until it was too late. These bridges will fall, the voice continued. 3 days. Many will die unless you make them listen. Why me? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Because you survived before. Because you understand the cost of not listening. Because you can see me when others cannot. I looked up at the bridge and gasped. The figure was there, not in a photo, not in my peripheral vision, but standing right there in broad daylight. 8 feet tall, with wings that stretched almost 20 feet across. Its face was mostly human, but the eyes were like burning red coals, and when it opened its mouth, I saw rows of sharp teeth. But strangest of all, I wasn't afraid. Somehow, I knew it wasn't there to hurt me. Tomorrow, the small bridge falls at sunset. The day after, the waterfall bridge fails at noon. The third day, this bridge, it collapses at dawn. Families will be crossing. Children will die. Unless you stop them. More visions flooded my mind. Specific scenes of the disasters to come. I saw a family in a station wagon crossing the first bridge just as it gave way, the car tumbling into the river. Saw hikers on the second bridge when it collapsed, sending them plummeting into the gorge. Saw school children on a field trip standing on this very bridge when the steel beams snapped and the whole structure folded like a house of cards. How can I stop it? I asked. Nobody will believe me. They'll think I'm crazy. Find another way. You are an engineer of bridges. Make them see the danger without telling them how you know. The figure spread its massive wings and leaped into the air. For a moment, it hung there, silhouetted against the sky, and I could see it clearly as anything I'd ever seen in my life. Then it folded its wings and dropped into the canyon, disappearing among the shadows. I stood there for a long time, my mind racing. The creature, Mothman, I realized, remembering the old stories, was right about one thing. I was an engineer, trained to spot structural problems, and I'd just been given the most detailed inspection of my life. I spent the next 2 hours going over every inch of those bridges in my memory, looking for real, documentable problems that would justify closing them. The damage was there. I'd seen it, photographed it, measured it. The question was whether I could convince my superiors to act on it quickly enough. As I drove back to the ranger station, I was already planning my approach. Emergency reports, urgent phone calls, maybe even going over Jim's head to the regional office if necessary. I had less than 3 days to save lives, and the clock was already ticking. Jim Harrison was waiting for me when I got back to the station, along with Frank Morrison from the SOS, the regional office. They'd spread my photographs across Jim's desk and were studying them with worried expressions. "Vince, this damage is worse than we thought," Jim said, without looking up. "Frank here thinks we might need to call in a structural engineer." I set my latest batch of photos on the desk, my hands still shaking slightly. "We don't have time for that. These bridges need to be closed now, today." Frank looked up at me with raised eyebrows. He was one of those guys who'd spent his whole career behind a desk, making decisions about places he'd never visited. "Now hold on there, Ranger Galloway. I understand you're concerned, but we can't just shut down major access roads without proper documentation and approval. Do you have any idea how much tourism revenue we'd lose?" "Do you have any idea how many people could die?" I shot back, probably louder than I should have. But I kept seeing those visions. The car in the river, the hikers falling, the school children screaming. Jim held up a hand to calm us both down. "Vince, walk us through what you found. Start with the worst one." For the next hour, I gave them the most detailed briefing of my career. I showed them every crack, every loose bolt, every sign of structural failure. I explained how the flood damage had compromised the foundations, how metal fatigue was spreading through the support beams, how the wooden decks were rotting from the inside out. What I didn't tell them was how I knew exactly when each bridge would fail. Frank listened, but I could see he wasn't convinced. "The damage is concerning," he admitted, "but bridges are built with safety margins. Even with this deterioration, they should hold for months, maybe years, with proper maintenance." "Not these bridges," I said firmly. "The damage is too extensive. We're looking at catastrophic failure, not gradual deterioration." "Based on what evidence?" Frank challenged. "You're a forest ranger, not a structural engineer. I need expert analysis before I authorize closing 3 major bridges." I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him. Instead, I pulled out my radio and tuned it to the emergency frequency. Static filled the room, but underneath it, faint but audible, came those warning voices again. "Structural failure. Evacuate immediately. Bridge collapse imminent." Jim and Frank looked at each other with puzzled expressions. "What is that?" Jim asked. I honestly didn't know how to explain it, so I just said, "Emergency transmissions. Someone else is picking up the danger." That was stretching the truth pretty thin, but it seemed to worry them. Frank made some calls to his superiors while Jim started drafting emergency closure orders. By late afternoon, we had approval to close the most damaged bridge, the Devil's Canyon span, but the other 2 would stay open pending further inspection. It wasn't enough. According to Mothman's warnings, the first bridge would collapse at sunset, less than 4 hours away. I spent those 4 hours doing everything I could think of. I called the state police and reported potential structural problems on the Cheat River Bridge. I drove out there myself and set up warning signs and flares, making the approach look as dangerous as possible. I even called in a fake report about a gas leak near the bridge, hoping to keep people away. At 6:30 p.m., I was sitting in my truck about a quarter mile from the bridge, watching through binoculars. A few cars had turned around when they saw my warning set up, but I was terrified that someone would ignore the signs and drive onto the bridge anyway. At exactly 7:15 p.m., sunset, it happened. I was watching through the binoculars when I saw the bridge deck suddenly sag in the middle. The steel support beams made a sound like gunshots as they snapped, and the whole center section dropped into the river with a crash that I could hear from a quarter mile away. If there had been anyone on that bridge, they would have died. I sat there for a few minutes, shaking with relief and terror in equal measure. Mothman had been right. The question now was whether I could prevent the next 2 disasters. The second, bridge, at Blackwater Falls was supposed to fail at noon the next day. This time, I didn't wait for approval. I drove out there at dawn and set up an even more elaborate warning system. Detour signs, emergency flares, caution tapes stretched across the road. I even called in another fake emergency report, this time claiming there was an active wasp nest under the bridge. At 11:45 a.m., I was hiding in the woods near the bridge when I saw them. A family with 3 kids, trying to move my barriers so they could get to the waterfall viewing area. I ran out of the woods, yelling at them to get back. "The bridge is unsafe. It's about to collapse." The father, a big guy in a flannel shirt, looked annoyed. "Says who? These barriers weren't here yesterday." "Says me, and I'm a forest ranger. That bridge is going to fall down any minute now." The mother was already herding the kids back toward their car, but the father stood his ground. "You can't just block off public areas without proper notification. I've got rights." "You'll have the right to be dead if you step on that bridge," I told him. "Please, just trust me. Give me 15 minutes, and if nothing happens, you can file a complaint with my supervisor." Something in my voice must have convinced him, because he nodded reluctantly and walked back to his family. They got in their car and drove away just as my watch hit noon. At 12:03 p.m., the Blackwater Falls Bridge collapsed into the gorge with a roar like thunder. 2 down, 1 to go. The Devil's Canyon Bridge was scheduled to fail at dawn the next morning. This was the most remote of the 3, but according to Mothman's vision, there would be school children there when it fell. That seemed impossible. What would a school group be doing in such a remote area so early in the morning? I called every school district within 50 miles, asking about field trips. On my 10-to of call, I hit pay dirt. Washington Elementary was taking their 5th grade class on a dawn nature walk to see deer and other wildlife. They were planning to cross Devil's Canyon Bridge at 6 o'clock a.m. sharp. The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was polite but firm when I tried to warn her. "We've had this trip planned for months, Ranger Galloway. The children are so excited. Unless there's an official closure order, we're going through with it." There was no time to get official approval. I tried calling the school principal, the district superintendent, even the county sheriff. Everyone wanted documentation, official orders, proper procedures. None of them understood that those children would be standing on a bridge when it collapsed at sunrise. Finally, at 11 o'clock p.m., I made the hardest decision of my life. I drove out to Devil's Canyon with a toolbox, a crowbar, and a heavy heart. I didn't want to damage the bridge myself. That felt too much like sabotage, like I'd be causing the disaster instead of preventing it. But I could make sure that nobody would want to cross it in the morning. I removed several deck boards near the middle of the span, creating gaps too wide to walk across. I loosened bolts on the railings so they'd wobble at the slightest touch. I hung warning tape and danger signs from every available surface. When Mrs. Patterson's class arrived at 5:45 a.m., they took one look at the bridge and decided their dawn nature walk could happen on the other side of the canyon. At exactly 6 o'clock a.m., as the first rays of sunlight touched the bridge, the entire structure collapsed with a roar that echoed off the canyon walls for almost 30 seconds. 23 fifth graders and their teacher were standing safely on solid ground, watching in amazement as the bridge they'd been planning to cross disappeared into the depths of Devil's Canyon. The official investigation into the simultaneous bridge failures lasted 3 months. Engineers from the State Transportation Department concluded that an unusually severe winter followed by rapid spring flooding had created unprecedented stress conditions that led to the catastrophic collapses. My role in preventing casualties was officially recognized. I received commendations for exceptional vigilance and quick thinking in identifying structural hazards. The fact that I'd somehow predicted the exact timing of each collapse was quietly overlooked. Nobody wanted to ask questions they might not like the answers to. Frank Morrison never questioned why I'd been so certain about the bridge failures, but I noticed he started approving my safety recommendations a lot faster after that. Jim Harrison put me in charge of all structural inspections for the entire forest, with authority to close any bridge or road I deemed unsafe. The story made national news for a few days. Forest rangers' intuition saves dozens of lives. But it faded quickly when no one could explain how I'd known when the bridges would fail. I preferred it that way. But the story wasn't really over. 3 weeks after the last bridge collapse, I was doing a routine patrol near Devil's Canyon when I saw the Mothman again. This time, it didn't hide or appear only in photographs. It stood in broad daylight on a rock outcropping, wings folded, those red eyes fixed on me with what I could only describe as gratitude. "You listened," the voice said in my mind. "You acted. No one died." "Why me?" I asked aloud, knowing somehow that it could hear me. "Why did you choose me to warn?" "Because you survived the Silver Bridge. Because you understand that some warnings must be heeded, even when they cannot be explained. Because you were willing to risk your reputation to save lives." The creature spread its wings, and I could see how magnificent and terrible it truly was. Not evil, I understood that now, but something from outside our normal world, carrying knowledge that came at a cost. "Other warnings will come," it told me, as other disasters approach. "Will you listen again?" I thought about those 23 school children who were alive because I'd chosen to believe in something impossible. I thought about the families who'd made it home safely because I'd acted on a supernatural warning. "Yes," I said. "I'll listen." The Mothman nodded once, a strangely human gesture from such an inhuman creature. Then it leaped into the air and disappeared among the canyon shadows. That was 30 years ago. I'm retired now, but I still live near the forest, and I still get the warnings. Not often, maybe once or twice a year, but when they come, I act on them. A mudslide that would have buried a campground, a tree about to fall across a busy hiking trail, a flash flood that would have caught a group of kayakers. People think I'm just good at my job, that I have some kind of natural instinct for spotting danger. They don't need to know the truth, they just need to be safe. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is right, I can hear the Mothman's wings overhead, still watching, still warning, still trying to prevent the tragedies it sees coming. And I sleep better knowing that someone, or something, is looking out for us, even if most people will never know it's there. The Silver Bridge collapse taught me that ignoring warnings can cost lives. The forest bridges taught me that some warnings come from places we don't understand, and that's okay. What matters isn't where the warning comes from. It's whether we're brave enough to listen. I've been listening for 30 years now, and I'll keep listening until the day I die. Because somewhere out there, in the shadows between what we know and what we fear, the Mothman is still watching over us. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it finds someone willing to hear its warnings and act on them, no matter how impossible they might seem. That's my story. That's the truth. And if you ever see something with glowing red eyes and wings like shadows, don't run away. Listen to what it's trying to tell you. Your life might depend on it. My name is Teresa Whitlock, but everyone calls me Terry. I've been a ranger at Jefferson National Forest for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, drug runners, flash floods, you name it. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. Before I became a ranger, I worked as an EMT in Richmond for 8 years. City ambulance work burned me out fast. Too many overdoses, too many car crashes, too many nights watching people die while their families screamed. The mountains seemed peaceful after all that chaos. Quiet. Safe. I specialized in night patrols and search and rescue. Most folks think the forest is dangerous at night, but I always felt more at home in the darkness. My flashlight cutting through the trees, the sound of my boots on the trail, the way wildlife moved just beyond the beam. It all made sense to me. I was good at finding people who got lost. Real good. The forest has its own rhythm after dark. Owls calling, branches creaking in the wind, small animals rustling through leaves. When something breaks that rhythm, you notice right away. That's how you find people. You listen for what doesn't belong. I never believed in ghost stories or monster tales. Shadow people were just sleep-starved minds playing tricks. Every missing person case had a logical explanation. Someone got turned around, fell down a cliff, had a heart attack, or just plain wandered off the trail. In 14 years, I'd never seen anything I couldn't explain with basic common sense. That changed in September 1992. It started with David Martinez, a 22-year-old college kid from Virginia Tech, engineering student, honor roll, Eagle Scout, the kind of hiker who knew what he was doing. He'd planned a 3-day solo trip on a section of the Appalachian Trail that cuts through our forest. His girlfriend called us when he didn't. Come home Sunday night. I got the call at 6 a.m. Monday morning. Chief Ranger Brooks briefed me over coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. Kid's car is still at the peaks of Otter Trailhead, he said. Girlfriend says he always calls if he's running late. Been hiking since he was 12. Any weather issues over the weekend? I asked. Clear skies, no storms, no flash flood warnings. Perfect hiking weather. That should have been my first warning. In my experience, perfect weather meant something else was wrong. I drove out to the trailhead and found David's Honda Civic right where it should be. Clean car, everything normal. I checked his registration. He'd signed in Friday afternoon, planning to exit at Jennings Creek on Sunday evening, a reasonable route for an experienced hiker. The trail was in good condition, no washouts, no fallen trees blocking the path. I hiked the first 2 miles looking for any sign of where David might have gone off route. His boot prints were easy to follow in the soft earth. Size 11 hiking boots with a distinctive waffle pattern. Then about 3 miles in, his tracks just stopped. Not gradually, like he'd wandered off the trail. Not like he'd backtracked or changed direction. They just ended, right in the middle of the path. The last clear print was a left foot mid-stride. After that, nothing but undisturbed leaves and dirt. I stood there for 10 minutes, studying the ground. In all my years of search and rescue, I'd never seen anything like it. People don't just vanish mid-step. I expanded my search pattern, looking for signs he'd jumped off the trail or been dragged away. Nothing. That's when I noticed the shadows. The trail ran through thick forest canopy, mostly oak and pine trees that blocked out most of the sunlight even at midday. Shadows fell everywhere, dark patches that shifted as the wind moved the branches. Bove. But there was one shadow that didn't move with the trees. It held the shape of a person, maybe 30 feet off the trail, and it stayed perfectly still while everything around it swayed and danced. I blinked hard and looked again. Just normal forest shadows. My mind was playing tricks on me. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. But as I hiked back to my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the dark spaces between the trees. The search for David Martinez became a full operation by Tuesday morning. We had 12 volunteers, 2 tracking dogs, and a helicopter doing aerial sweeps. Standard grid search protocol. We'd find him within 48 hours, probably dehydrated and embarrassed, but alive. The dogs lost his scent at the same spot where his tracks disappeared. They circled the area, whining and pulling back toward the trailhead. Rex, our best bloodhound, actually refused to go forward. In 8 years working with that dog, I'd never seen him back down from a trail. Probably a bear in the area, said Jim Morrison, our K9 handler. Sometimes they spook when they smell predator markings. But I'd worked with Rex before. When he smelled bear, he got excited, not scared. This was different. The dog was genuinely afraid. By Wednesday, we had to expand the search area. That's when Sarah Chen, a day hiker, reported something strange. She'd been on the same trail section Sunday afternoon, maybe an hour before David passed through. There was this guy ahead of me, she told me. Early 20s, dark hair, green backpack. Had to be your missing person. But there was something following him. Another hiker? No, not exactly. Sarah fidgeted with her water bottle. It looked like a shadow. A person-shaped shadow moving through the trees, keeping pace with him. I thought maybe it was just the way the light was hitting the branches, but what? It was moving wrong, like the trees were casting shadows in one direction because of where the sun was, but this shadow was going sideways. Against the grain, if it makes sense. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. That night I decided to hike David's route in reverse. Sometimes you see different things when you change your perspective. I started at Jennings Creek around 8 p.m., planning to hike back to the point where his tracks disappeared. The forest felt different after dark, heavier somehow. My flashlight beam seemed weaker than usual, like the darkness was pushing back against it. Every sound was too loud, my footsteps, my breathing, the rustle of my jacket against my pack. About an hour in, I started hearing footsteps behind me. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I walked. They walked. I spun around, shining my light back down the trail. Nothing but empty path and tree shadows dancing in the beam. "Hello?" I called out. "Forest Service, is someone there?" No answer. But I could feel eyes watching me from somewhere beyond my light. I kept walking, but the feeling got stronger. Someone was definitely following me, matching my pace perfectly, staying just outside my flashlight's reach. Every ranger instinct told me to turn around and get out of there. But David Martinez was somewhere in these woods, and finding him was my job. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. A shadow detached itself from the trees about 50 feet ahead of me. Not a normal shadow. This one had depth and weight to it, like looking at a person through dark glass. It stood right in the middle of the trail, perfectly still, waiting. I stopped walking. The shadow didn't move. I took a step forward. It took a step back. "David?" I called. "David Martinez?" The shadow tilted its head, like it was listening. Then it raised one arm and pointed deeper into the forest, off the main trail. Every rational part of my mind screamed that this was wrong. Shadows don't point. They don't think. They don't lead people anywhere. But what if this wasn't just a shadow? What if someone was trying to help me find David? I followed it. The shadow moved smoothly through the trees, never quite close enough for my light to hit it directly, but always visible in my peripheral vision. It led me down a slope I'd never noticed before, through a grove of pine trees that seemed too perfectly arranged, like someone had planted them in rows. My radio crackled with static. I tried calling base camp, but got nothing but white noise. The GPS unit on my belt was spinning wildly, showing my location as somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That should have been warning enough. But I kept following the shadow because it was the first real lead I'd found in 3 days of searching. After 20 minutes of walking through unmarked forest, the shadow stopped. It pointed down at something on the ground, then faded away like smoke. I aimed my flashlight where it had been pointing and nearly dropped the light in shock. David Martinez was lying there, curled up on his side like he was sleeping. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. He was breathing, but when I shook his shoulder and called his name, he didn't respond. His skin was cold and his pulse was weak, but he'd only been missing 3 days. He should have been dehydrated, scratched up from wandering through the underbrush, maybe hypothermic. Instead, he looked like he'd just laid down for a nap. "David, can you hear me? I'm Ranger Whitlock. You're safe now." He blinked once, slowly, but his eyes never focused on me. It was like he was looking through me at something far away. I tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. My GPS was showing impossible coordinates. According to the device, we were 300 feet underground and moving north at 60 miles per hour. That's when I realized the trees around us were wrong. The pine grove I'd followed the shadow through was gone. We were sitting in a clearing surrounded by bare oak trees, even though it was only September and the leaves shouldn't have fallen yet. But the worst part was the silence. No insects. No night birds. No wind in the branches. The kind of absolute quiet that makes your ears ring and your heart pound. I picked up David in a fireman's carry and started walking back the way I'd come. At least the way I thought I'd come. But every direction looked the same. Dead trees and patches of shadow that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. We weren't lost. We were somewhere else entirely. Carrying David through that nightmare forest was like trying to navigate through hell itself. Every shadow seemed to move just outside my flashlight beam. The dead trees creaked and swayed even though there was no wind. And worst of all, I could hear footsteps keeping pace with us. Sometimes behind, sometimes to the side, sometimes circling around ahead. David was no help. He stayed conscious but completely unresponsive, like his mind was somewhere else. His body was there, but the person inside was gone. just breathing meat draped over my shoulders. I tried to retrace our path, but nothing looked familiar. The landscape kept changing when I wasn't paying attention. A fallen log would appear where empty ground had been a minute before. A stream would start babbling somewhere to my left, then vanish when I turned to look. My radio was dead. My GPS showed we were now apparently located in downtown Richmond, moving at impossible speeds. Even my compass was spinning like a broken toy. After an hour of stumbling through the dark, I found what looked like a trail. Not the Appalachian Trail. This path was too narrow, cutting through the trees in strange curves that hurt your eyes to follow. But it was better than wandering blind through the forest. The trail led us to a clearing where I found something that made my blood freeze. 3 backpacks were arranged in a perfect triangle around a cold fire pit. I recognized one immediately. It was David's Green Nort H facepack. The other 2 were older, weathered by months of rain and sun. I checked the name tags with my flashlight. Jennifer Walsh, reported missing 6 months ago. Marcus Thompson, vanished 4 months back. Both had disappeared on solo hiking trips in Jefferson National Forest. Both had been experienced hikers who knew the trails better than most rangers. Both had simply walked into the woods and never walked out. I was starting to understand that David wasn't the first. He was just the latest. That's when the shadows came back. They emerged from the tree line slowly, one at a time, until I counted at least a dozen human-shaped silhouettes surrounding our clearing. They didn't move like normal shadows. These things had weight and presence, like they were casting themselves instead of being cast by something else. I set David down against a tree and pulled out my service weapon, a .40 caliber Smith Wesson that had never failed me before. Fat lot of good it would do against shadows, but holding it made me feel slightly less helpless. "Stay back," I shouted. "Forest Service, this is federal land." The shadows didn't care about my authority. They began moving closer, gliding across the ground without disturbing the leaves beneath them. Up close, I could see they weren't completely flat. They had a kind of depth, like looking at smoke trapped behind glass. And while they didn't have faces, I could feel them watching me. One of them reached out with an arm-shaped appendage and touched my flashlight. The beam flickered and dimmed to almost nothing. Another touched my radio, and it crumbled to pieces like it was made of rust. They were draining the power from everything electronic. My GPS died next, then my digital watch. Even the battery-powered lantern in my pack went dark. But they weren't just affecting machines. I could feel them pulling at something inside me, too. My thoughts became sluggish, like trying to think through thick fog. My memories started feeling distant and unclear. Had I really been a ranger for 14 years? Had I ever worked as an EMT? Or was that someone else's life I was remembering? David made a sound, the first noise he'd made since I found him. Not words, just a low moan like someone having a bad dream. But when I looked at him, his eyes were clearer than they'd been before. "Don't let them take you," he whispered. "They're feeding." Before I could ask what he meant, the shadows surged forward all at once. I ran. Abandoning David went against everything I'd been trained to do, but staying would have meant losing both of us. I sprinted into the trees, branches tearing at my clothes and face, the shadows flowing after me like spilled ink. They were fast, faster than any living thing had a right to be. They moved through the trees without slowing down, passing through trunks and boulders like they weren't there. I could hear them behind me. Not footsteps, but a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel. My flashlight was almost dead, putting out barely enough light to keep me from running into trees. But even that dim glow seemed to slow them down a little. They kept their distance from the beam, circling around it instead of coming straight through. That's when I remembered the emergency flare in my pack. I pulled it out while running, nearly tripping over a root in the process. The shadows were getting closer, close enough that I could feel a terrible cold radiating from them. My breath came out in white puffs, even though it was a warm September night. I popped the flare and held it high. The effect was immediate. The shadows recoiled like they'd been burned, retreating to the edge of the light with sounds like steam escaping from a radiator. The forest around me suddenly looked normal again. Regular trees, normal shadows that stayed where they belonged, familiar trail markers that matched my mental map of the area. For the first time in hours, my surroundings made ominous. The flare would last maybe 15 minutes. After that, I'd be back in the dark with those things. But at least now, I had a direction. The main trail was only a quarter-mile to my east. If I could reach it before the flare died, I might have a chance. I started running again, this time toward salvation instead of away from nightmare. Behind me, just at the edge of the flare's glow, I could see the shadows pacing back and forth like caged animals, waiting for their chance. The light was already starting to fade. The flare sputtered and dimmed as I reached the main trail, but it was enough. Real trail markers, real blazes painted on real trees. I was back in the world I knew, at least for now. But I couldn't leave David behind. Whatever those things were doing to him, he was still alive. Still my responsibility. And if I was right about the pattern, Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Thompson might still be alive too, trapped in that shadow realm just like David had been. I had 3 more flares in my pack, plus a heavy-duty flashlight with fresh batteries back at my truck. If bright light could hurt those things, maybe I could mount some kind of rescue mission. It was completely insane. I should have hiked straight back to the ranger station, called in the FBI or the National Guard or whoever handles impossible situations like shadow monsters. But David didn't have time for bureaucracy. Every minute he spent in that place, more of him disappeared. I made it to my truck just as the flare died completely. The parking area looked blessedly normal, street lights humming overhead, my Ford Ranger right where I'd left it, the sound of traffic on the distant highway. For a moment, I almost convinced myself the whole thing had been some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and too much coffee. Then I looked at my watch. According to the timepiece, I'd been gone for 6 hours. It felt like 20 minutes. I grabbed my heavy flashlight, checked the batteries, and loaded fresh ones into my backup light. I also took my camping lantern, 2 more flares, and the Emerge NC spotlight I kept for nighttime rescues. If those shadows fed on darkness, I was going to blind them. The hike back to the clearing took half the time it should have, like the forest was eager to pull me back into its trap. My lights cut through the darkness easily, but I could see shapes moving just beyond their reach, patient, hungry things waiting for their chance. I found the clearing exactly where I'd left it, but now there were 4 people arranged around the cold fire pit. David was still propped against his tree, but Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Thompson, and a 4th person I didn't recognize were sitting in a circle, all staring at nothing with the same empty expression David had worn. The shadows stood at the edge of my light, dozens of them now, watching and waiting. "I know what you are," I called out to them. "You're feeding on them, keeping them alive so you can drain them slowly." One of the shadows stepped forward, and for the first time it tried to communicate. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, like whispers echoing off canyon walls. "We are between," it said, "between light and dark, between real and not real, between alive and dead. They help us become." Become what? More real, more solid, more able to touch your world. The shadow gestured toward the 4 victims. "Their dreams feed us. Their memories make us stronger. Soon we will not need the between place. We will walk in your light." That's when I understood. These weren't just predators hunting for food. They were trying to cross over into our reality permanently. Every person they captured made them more solid, more powerful. David and the others weren't just victims. They were bridges. "Let them go," I said. "You cannot make us, but you can join them. Give us your memories, your dreams, your light. Help us become real." "Not happening." The shadow tilted its head. "Then you will. I'll die and they will remain. We have time. We have forever." The shadows began moving closer, testing the edges of my light. Every time one of them got too close to the beam, it pulled back, with that hissing steam sound. But they were learning, adapting, finding the weak spots where my illumination was thinnest. I lit another flare and threw it toward the tree line. The shadows retreated further, buying me a few more minutes. But I was running out of light sources, and they knew it. That's when David spoke again, clearer this time. "Terry, the fire pit. Old campfire. Still has coals." I looked at the cold fire ring. It did look recently used. There were charred logs and what might have been warm ashes underneath. If I could get a fire started, it would give me more light than any flashlight or flare. I pulled out my waterproof matches and started building a fire with the remaining wood. The shadows pressed closer, sensing what I was trying to do. My flare was already starting to fade. The first match went out in a wind that shouldn't have existed. The second one, too. I had 3 matches left when the flare died completely. Darkness rushed in like a flood. The shadows surged forward, reaching for me with arms that felt like ice water. I struck the third match. It caught. The kindling blazed up immediately, like it had been soaked in gasoline. The fire spread to the larger logs with unnatural speed, throwing light and heat in all directions. The shadows shrieked, the first real sound I'd heard them make, and fled to the distant tree line. By the fire's light, I could see the clearing as it really was. Not some otherworldly trap, but an ordinary campsite about a mile off the main trail, a place where hikers sometimes stopped to rest. The shadows were still there, but they looked smaller now, less substantial, more like normal shadows cast by the dancing flames. David blinked and looked directly at me for the first time. "Ranger Whitlock?" "Right here, David. You're okay. You're safe." The others were coming around too. Jennifer Walsh sat up until he looked around in confusion. "Where am I? What happened to my hike?" Marcus Thompson was the worst off. He'd been missing the longest and took several minutes to remember his own name. The fourth person turned out to be a day hiker named Paul Kim, who'd disappeared just 2 weeks ago. As long as the fire burned, the shadows kept their distance. But I could see them out there in the dark, waiting. The flames wouldn't last forever, and when they died, those things would be back. "Can everyone walk?" I asked. They could, though they were all weak and disoriented. I helped them gather what gear we could carry and started leading them back toward the main trail. The fire would have to burn itself out. I couldn't risk extinguishing our only protection. We made it maybe 50 yards before the shadows tried one last attack. They came from all sides at once, flowing between the trees like liquid darkness. But something had changed. Instead of the solid, threatening presence they'd had before, they seemed thinner now, weaker. The fire had done more than just drive them back. It had broken their hold on this place. I held up my flashlight and they scattered like smoke. "Keep moving," I told the others. "Don't look back." We reached the main trail just as dawn began breaking through the trees. The shadows faded with the growing light, becoming ordinary patches of darkness that stayed where they belonged. It took 2 hours to get everyone back to the trailhead, and another hour before the ambulances arrived. David, Jennifer, Marcus, and Paul were all hospitalized for dehydration and observation. Officially, they'd suffered from exposure-induced disorientation and had been found sheltering together in an unmarked campsite. I never mentioned the shadows in my report. That was 3 months ago. David Martinez made a full recovery and went back to college. Jennifer Walsh moved to California and refuses to talk about her time in the forest. Marcus Thompson still has nightmares but is seeing a therapist. Paul Kim took up photography and never goes anywhere without bright lights and spare batteries. None of them remember much about their missing time. They recall hiking alone, then waking up around a campfire with me shining a flashlight in their faces. The doctors say trauma can cause that kind of memory loss. I don't correct them. I still work nights in Jefferson National Forest, but things are different now. I carry more flashlights than any ranger needs. 3 headlamps, 2 handheld lights, backup batteries, emergency flares, even a small camping lantern clipped to my pack. My fellow rangers think I've developed some kind of phobia about the dark. They're not wrong. I've learned to read the signs that most people miss. When the forest gets too quiet, when shadows fall the wrong way, when wildlife suddenly goes silent and still. There are places in these mountains where the boundary between our world and somewhere else gets thin. The shadows congregate there, waiting. I've started keeping a map of high-risk areas, trail sections where hikers disappear more often than they should, Places where compass readings don't match the terrain. Spots where electronic equipment fails for no apparent reason. I share this information with other rangers as environmental hazards or navigation difficulties. Most of them think I'm being overly cautious, but disappearances in Jefferson National Forest have dropped by 60% since I started warning people away from those areas. I've also noticed that the shadows are changing. They're not as bold as they used to be, not as solid. The fire that night didn't just drive them away, it weakened them somehow. They're still out there, but they're more careful now, more afraid. Which makes me wonder, if 4 missing hikers could make them stronger, what did rescuing those same 4 people do to them? Last week, I got a call from a ranger in Shenandoah National Park. They've had 3 unexp's, lane disappearances in the past month, all experienced hikers who vanished during daylight hours. The last person to see each victim reported they were being followed by moving shadows on the trail. I'm driving up there this weekend with extra batteries and emergency flares. Because here's what I've learned about shadow people. They're not just sleep deprivation hallucinations. They're not interdimensional beings either. They're something worse. They're what happens when the darkness between worlds gets hungry enough to reach into ours. And they're spreading. My name is Teresa Whitlock, and I hunt shadows now. Not because I want to, but because someone has to. The Forest Service doesn't have a protocol for supernatural predators, so I've had to write my own. Rule 1, always carry more light than you think you need. Rule 2, trust your instincts when the forest feels wrong. Rule 3, never hike alone in areas where shadows don't behave normally. Rule 4, if you find someone who's been missing for days, but looks like they just laid down for a nap, get them to bright light immediately and don't let them out of your sight until they can tell you their own name. Rule 5, fire works better than flashlights, but any light is better than none. Rule 6, they're not invincible. They can be fought. They can be weakened. And Rule 7, they remember the people who fight back. I still love these mountains. I still believe in protecting the people who come here to find peace and beauty and connection with nature. But now I know that nature includes things we were never meant to understand, and some of them see us as food. The shadows know my name now. Sometimes I catch them following me on patrol, keeping just outside my lights, watching and learning. They're patient, they're smart, and they're waiting for me to make a mistake. But I've got news for them. I used to work as an EMT in Richmond. I've seen what real monsters look like, and they wear human faces. A bunch of hungry shadows don't scare me nearly as much as they think they do. Besides, I've got 14 years of experience finding people in these woods. Now I'm learning how to make sure they stay found. My name is Samuel Boone, and I've been a forest ranger for 16 years. People always ask if I'm related to Daniel Boone, the famous explorer. I tell them maybe, but honestly, I don't know. What I do know is that the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky has been my home and my job for longer than I care to count. I'm 41 years old, divorced, and I live alone in a ranger station deep in the Panther Creek Wilderness area. 50,000 acres of thick forest, rocky hills, and winding streams. Before I became a ranger, I was Kentucky State Police for 8 years. I specialized in tracking dangerous wildlife, bears that got too close to campgrounds, wild dogs that threatened livestock. I thought I'd seen everything the woods could throw at me. I was wrong. The trouble started in September 1988 during one of the worst droughts Kentucky had seen in decades. The creek beds were dry, leaves were falling early, and the animals were acting strange. They moved closer to human settlements looking for water and food. That's normal during a drought. What wasn't normal were the reports I started getting from farmers. "Sam, you need to come look at this," said Bill Henderson, calling me on the radio at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Bill owned a cattle ranch that bordered the forest. He was a tough old guy who dealt with coyotes, wild dogs, even a black bear once. Nothing usually rattled him, but his voice was shaking. I drove my pickup truck down the dirt road to his farm, bouncing over potholes and fallen branches. Bill was waiting for me by his barn, holding a cup of coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "It's over here," he said, leading me toward his back pasture. The cow was lying on its side near the tree line. At first glance, it looked like a normal predator attack. But as I got closer, I saw things that made my stomach turn. The cow had two small, precise holes in its neck. The wounds were clean, almost surgical. There was no tearing, no claw marks, no signs of a struggle. The animal looked almost peaceful, like it had just laid down to sleep. But there was no blood anywhere. Not a drop. "How much did this cow weigh?" I asked Bill. "About 800 pounds. "And you found her like this?" "Just like this. Sam, I've been raising cattle for 30 years. I've seen coyote kills, dog attacks, even a mountain lion once. This ain't like anything I've ever seen." I knelt down and examined the wounds more closely. They were perfectly round, about the size of a pencil. Whatever made them had gone straight into the jugular vein. I'd seen enough crime scenes to know what a precise kill looked like. "Any tracks?" Bill nodded and pointed toward the forest. "That's the weird part." The tracks were clear in the dry dirt. Dog prints, but bigger than any domestic dog I'd ever seen. Bigger than a German shepherd, maybe even bigger than a Great Dane. But the stride was all wrong. These weren't the tracks of a single animal. There were at least 4 sets, all moving together in a perfect line toward the trees. "Bill, I want you to keep your cattle close to the barn for a while, and call me if you see anything else." Over the next 2 weeks, I got 11 more calls. Different farms, same story. Cattle, horses, even goats. All found dead with those same precise neck wounds. All drained completely of blood. All near the forest edge. I set up cameras, tried to establish patrol patterns, but the attacks kept happening. The animals were found at dawn, always perfectly positioned, always bloodless. The tracks were always the same, large canine prints, moving in formation. Local people started talking about the old stories. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was in her 80s and had lived in these hills her whole life. She came by the ranger station one evening with a casserole and some unwelcome information. "My grandmother used to tell stories about shadow dogs," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Said they came during the bad times, droughts, harsh winters, when the forest was hurting." I thanked her for the casserole and politely listened to her stories, but I didn't believe in legends. I believed in evidence, tracks, and logical explanations. There had to be a pack of feral dogs living deep in the forest. Big dogs, maybe mixed with wolf blood. They were being driven out by the drought, attacking easy prey. That's what I told myself anyway. The first time I saw them, I almost convinced myself I was dreaming. I'd set up a watch post on Hill Ridge, overlooking the Henderson farm and 3 others. It was a clear October night with a half moon, perfect visibility. I had night vision binoculars, a thermos of coffee, and my .30-06 rifle. If a pack of feral dogs was going to hit another farm, I'd be ready. For hours, everything was normal. Deer moving through the fields, an owl calling from the oak trees, the distant hum of trucks on the highway. I was starting to think it might be a quiet night when everything went silent. It wasn't gradual. One moment the forest was alive with the normal sounds of night. Crickets, rustling leaves, small animals moving through the brush. The next moment, nothing. Complete silence. Like someone had turned off a radio. I raised the binoculars and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. Even the deer had vanished. Then I heard the howling. It started low, almost below the range of human hearing, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then other voices joined in, creating a harmony that made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't like any wolf howl I'd ever heard. It was more organized, more purposeful, like a conversation. Through the binoculars, I saw movement at the edge of Henderson's back pasture. Shadows flowing between the trees, too big to be dogs, moving too smoothly to be natural. 6 shapes emerged from the forest. Even through the night vision, I could see they were massive. Bigger than any dog breed I knew, with broad chests and powerful shoulders. But their movement was wrong. They flowed across the ground like liquid, making no sound despite their size. They moved in perfect formation toward Henderson's cattle. The animals should have panicked, should have run or made noise, Instead, the cows just stood there, calm and still, as if they were hypnotized. I watched one of the creatures approach a young bull. The thing was huge, at least 150 pounds, with a broad head and eyes that reflected the moonlight like mirrors. It moved up to the bull with an almost gentle motion, then reared up on its hind legs and placed its front paws on the animal's shoulders. The bull didn't move, didn't struggle, didn't make a sound. The creature lowered its head to the bull's neck. I saw the muscles in its jaw work for maybe 30 seconds. Then it stepped back, and the bull simply lay down and didn't get up again. I fumbled for my rifle, but my hands were shaking. By the time I had it positioned, the creatures were already retreating into the forest. They moved in that same perfect formation, like soldiers following orders. The whole thing had taken maybe 5 minutes. I radioed the sheriff's department, then drove down to Henderson's farm. Bill met me at the gate with a shotgun. "You hear all that howling?" he asked. I heard it, and I saw them. We found the bull exactly where I'd watched it fall. Same precise wounds, same bloodless death, but this time I knew what had done it, and I didn't have any logical explanation. "Sam," Bill said quietly, "what the hell are we dealing with?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. But I was starting to understand that these weren't normal animals. Normal animals don't move in perfect silence. Normal animals don't coordinate attacks like military units. And normal animals don't hypnotize their prey. The next morning, I called the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Department. I spoke to Regional Supervisor Janet Morrison, a no-nonsense woman who'd been dealing with problem wildlife for 20 years. "Sam, you're describing a pack of large feral dogs," she said. "Probably mixed breed, maybe some wolf genetics. The drought is driving them out of their normal territory." "Janet, these things are bigger than wolves, and they move like nothing I've ever seen. Stress and night conditions can make animals appear larger than they are. Set up some trail cameras, get some clear photos, and we'll send a team to help you track them down." I set up 12 trail cameras around the most likely attack sites. Motion activated, infrared, the works. If these creatures came back, I'd have proof. They came back 3 nights later. The cameras caught them perfectly. Clear, detailed photos of 6 massive canines moving through the forest. But something was wrong with every single image. The creatures appeared to be slightly transparent, like double-exposed film. Their eyes glowed with an inner light that no normal animal's eyes should have. And in several photos, they seemed to be looking directly at the cameras, as if they knew they were being watched. The strangest part was the last photo on each camera. All 12 cameras stopped working at exactly the same time, 3:17 a.m. The final image on each one showed the same thing, one of the creatures standing directly in front of the lens, its glowing eyes filling the frame. When I developed the photos and showed them to Janet, she was quiet for a long time. "Sam," she finally said, "I'm going to need you to bring those cameras in, all of them. And I want you to stop discussing this case with anyone outside the department." "What's going on, Janet?" "I think you might be dealing with something that's not in any of our textbooks." The attacks escalated rapidly after that. What had been 1 or 2 incidents a week became nightly raids. The pack grew bolder, striking farms closer to town, taking larger animals. But they never left a mess, never killed more than they could feed on. Each animal was found in the same peaceful position, drained clean. I organized a meeting at the community center in Panther Creek Township. 37 farmers and ranchers showed up, along with Sheriff Tom Bradley and 2 of his deputies. I spread out maps of the attack sites and explained the pattern I'd identified. "They're working in a 5-mile radius," I said, pointing to the red pins I'd stuck in the map. "Each attack happens near forest access, always at night, always between midnight and dawn." "What exactly are we dealing with, Sam?" asked Mary Sullivan, who raised horses on the north side of the creek. I looked around the room at faces I'd known for years. Good people, practical people who dealt with the realities of rural life every day. How could I tell them I believed we were being hunted by something supernatural? "I think we're dealing with a pack of extremely large, extremely intelligent feral dogs," I said carefully. "They've learned to hunt together, and they're using the drought to their advantage." Old Pete Marshall raised his hand. Pete was 73 years old and had lived in these hills longer than anyone. My daddy used to talk about something like this, Pete said. Called them shadow dogs. Said they showed up every 20, 30 years when the forest was under stress. Said they weren't exactly natural. Several people nodded. I realized that the older residents had been expecting this. Pete, what did your father say about getting rid of them? Said you had to hunt them back into the deep forest, past where the old Cherokee settlements used to be. Had to make them understand that people weren't easy prey. Sheriff Bradley stood up. With respect to Pete and his father, we're dealing with animals here, dangerous enemies. Walls, but still animals. I'm authorizing hunters to shoot on sight, and we'll organize armed patrols. That night, we set up the first patrol. 12 men with rifles, divided into 3 groups, covering the most likely attack sites. I took the group watching Henderson's farm, along with Bill and 2 of his neighbors. We settled into position just after sunset. The plan was simple. If the pack showed up, we'd use spotlights to blind them and take them down with concentrated rifle fire. The pack had other ideas. They came at us from 3 directions simultaneously, not toward the cattle, toward us. The first sign was that oppressive silence falling over everything. Then the howling started, but this time it was different. Aggressive, challenging. There, Bill whispered, pointing toward the tree line. I raised my binoculars and felt my blood turn cold. The pack was spread out in a wide semicircle, maybe 200 yards away. But they weren't trying to hide. They were standing in clear view, watching us. The largest one, obviously the pack leader, stepped forward. Even at that distance, I could see its massive size and the intelligence in its glowing eyes. It let out a single, sharp bark. The other members of my patrol group began to panic. Jesus Christ, look at the size of that thing, whispered Jake Morrison. We need to call for backup, said Bill. But I was watching the pack leader, and I got the strangest feeling it was trying to communicate with me. It took several deliberate steps forward, then stopped. It barked once more, a sound that seemed to carry meaning. I stood up slowly, keeping my rifle ready. The pack leader tilted its massive head, studying me. Then it turned and trotted toward Henderson's cattle. The rest of the pack followed in formation. They're ignoring us, Bill said in amazement. We watched them take down 2 steers with the same efficient, almost gentle method I'd observed before. They fed quickly, then retreated toward the forest. But just before disappearing into the trees, the pack leader turned back and looked directly at me. The message was clear. We can kill your animals anytime we want. Your guns don't scare us. Over the next week, the patrols became a joke. The pack would show up, acknowledge our presence with what I could only interpret as amusement, then proceed with their hunting. They never attacked us directly, but they made it clear we were irrelevant to their plans. The psychological effect on the community was devastating. People stopped going out after dark. Parents drove their children to school instead of letting them walk. Several families packed up and went to stay with relatives in town. But the pack wasn't satisfied with terrorizing livestock anymore. They began stalking human beings. The first incident happened to Jenny Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter. Jenny was 16, a good kid who helped her grandmother with groceries and yard work. She was walking home from a friend's house around 8 p.m. when she saw them. There were 3 of them, she told me the next morning, her voice still shaking. They came out of the woods and just watched me. They walked alongside me for maybe a quarter mile, staying just at the edge of the road. They never got closer, but they never left either. Did they make any aggressive moves? No, but Mr. Boone, their eyes were glowing, not reflecting light, actually glowing, like they had fire inside them, and they were so big, bigger than any dog I've ever seen. Did you run? I wanted to, but I got the feeling that if I ran, they'd chase me. So I just kept walking, looking straight ahead, until I got to Grandma's house. When I looked back from her porch, they were gone. 2 nights later, they followed the school bus. Driver reported seeing them in his mirrors, keeping pace with the bus at 40 miles per hour, running alongside through the trees. They followed for 3 miles, then disappeared. The pack was testing us, learning our routines, our weaknesses, and I was starting to understand that they weren't just hunting for food anymore. They were establishing dominance, claiming territory. The breaking point came on October 23rd during the full moon. The pack hit 5 farms simultaneously, killing 12 animals in coordinated strikes across the entire township. But the attacks weren't random. They formed a pattern, a rough circle around the elementary school. The message was unmistakable. Your children are next. I called an emergency meeting for the next evening. This time, 43 people showed up, including several families with young children. The fear in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. They're not just hunting livestock anymore, I said without preamble. They're targeting us, studying us, learning our patterns. What do you want us to do, Sam? Asked Mary Sullivan. We can't just abandon our farms. Sheriff Bradley stood up. I've contacted the state police and the National Guard. We're dealing with an aggressive pack of animals, and we need professional help. Old Pete Marshall shook his head. Sheriff, with all due respect, the National Guard ain't gonna help with this. These aren't normal animals. Then what are they, Pete? Bradley asked with barely controlled frustration. Pete looked around the room, then directly at me. Tell them what you really saw, Sam. Tell them what you know in your gut. I took a deep breath. I was about to destroy my credibility with people who trusted me, but they deserved the truth. I think Pete's right, I said quietly. I think we're dealing with something that's not entirely natural. They move too fast. They're too intelligent. They coordinate too well. And they seem to have abilities that normal animals don't have. Several people started talking at once. Sheriff Bradley looked like he wanted to have me committed. But Janet Morrison, who had driven up from Frankfurt with a Fish and Wildlife team, surprised everyone. Sam's not crazy, she said. We've been researching this situation, and we've found similar incidents dating back to the 1800s. Every 20 to 30 years, during periods of environmental stress, reports of unusually large, intelligent canines surface in this region. The Cherokee called them shadow dogs. Early settlers called them devil hounds. The room went completely quiet. What happened to the previous packs? I asked. According to the reports, they eventually retreated back into the deep forest. Usually after a confrontation with armed humans resulted in casualties on both sides. Casualties? Sam, in 1932, a similar pack killed 4 people before disappearing. In 1959, they killed 2 children. These things aren't just supernatural. They're dangerous. That night, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Instead of waiting for the pack to attack children, I was going to track them to their den and force a confrontation. I gathered 5 volunteers, Bill Henderson, Jake Morrison, Pete Marshall, and 2 younger men, Danny Sullivan and Mike Torres, all experienced hunters, all desperate enough to take the risk. We met at the ranger station at midnight, armed with high-powered rifles, floodlights, and a radio to call for help. The plan was to follow the pack's trail back into the deep forest, find their den, and eliminate them before they could kill any humans. It took 3 hours of tracking to find the entrance to their lair. Deep in Panther Creek Valley, where the old Cherokee settlements used to be, we found a cave system that extended back into the hillside. The smell coming from the cave was indescribable. Death, decay, and something else that made my skin crawl. They're in there, Bill whispered. Fresh tracks led into the cave mouth, large, clear prints in the soft earth. But there were too many of them. Way too many. Pete, I said quietly, how big did your father say these packs got? He never said. But Sam, look at those tracks. There's got to be 20, 30 animals in there. We'd been tracking 6 creatures. If Pete was right, we were outnumbered 5 to 1. The howling started before we could decide whether to retreat. It came from deep in the cave system, echoing off stone walls and growing in volume. More voices joined in, creating a harmony that made our bones vibrate. Then they came out. The pack leader emerged first, its massive form silhouetted against our floodlights. But it wasn't alone. Behind it came creature after creature, pouring out of the cave like a nightmare made real. They were all huge, all perfectly coordinated, all focused on us with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. "Light them up," I shouted. We opened fire with everything we had. The creatures scattered, moving with impossible speed, but we kept shooting, swinging our lights to track them. I saw several go down, heard yelps of pain, but there were so many of them. The pack leader let out a roar that was part howl, part scream. It charged directly at me, moving faster than any living thing should be able to move. I got off 2 shots before it hit me, sending me flying backward into a tree. The world went dark for a moment. When my vision cleared, the creature was standing over me, its massive jaws inches from my throat. Up close, I could see that its eyes weren't just glowing. They were filled with an intelligence that was almost human. It could have killed me instantly. Instead, it studied my face for a long moment, then stepped back. The pack was retreating, but slowly, deliberately. They'd made their point. They could have killed all of us, but they chose not to. As they melted back into the forest, the pack leader turned one last time and looked at me. I got the strangest impression that it was trying to tell me something. Then it was gone, and the forest was silent again. We'd lost the battle, but something had changed. The creatures had shown restraint, mercy even. That gave me an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. The attacks stopped. For 3 days, nothing happened. No livestock kills, no stalking incidents, no howling in the night. The pack had simply vanished, as if they'd never existed. But I knew they were still out there, watching, waiting for our next move. On the 4th night, I made the craziest decision of my life. I drove out to Henderson's farm, parked at the edge of the forest, and waited alone. No weapons, no backup, no lights. Just me and whatever was living in those woods. The pack leader came alone. It emerged from the trees just after midnight, moving with that same fluid grace I'd come to recognize. It approached to within 20 feet of where I sat on the tailgate of my truck, then stopped and studied me. "I know you can understand me," I said quietly. "I don't know what you are or where you come from, but you're intelligent. You're not just animals." The creature tilted its massive head, listening. "This drought won't last forever. The forest will recover. You don't need to keep hunting our livestock, and we don't need to keep trying to kill each other." For several minutes, we just looked at each other. Then the creature did something that chilled me to the bone. It nodded. Once, deliberately, unmistakably. It understood every word I'd said. The creature stepped forward and placed something on the ground between us, then retreated to its original position. When it was clear the pack leader wasn't going to attack, I got down from the truck and picked up what it had left. It was a piece of bone, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. But somehow I knew what it meant. It was an agreement, a treaty. The attacks stopped completely after that night. The pack retreated into the deep forest, back to wherever they'd come from. Over the next few weeks, the drought broke, rain returned, and the forest began to recover. I filed my final report with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, attributing GE the incidents to a pack of unusually large feral dogs that had been driven out by environmental pressures. The official records show that the animals were never found, presumably having moved to another region or died from starvation. Janet Morrison knew better, but she never contradicted my report. The carved bone sits on my desk at the ranger station. I've shown it to archaeologists and anthropologists, but nobody can identify the symbols. The Cherokee Nation's cultural experts say it's not from their tradition, but it's definitely very old. Every few years, usually during environmental stress periods, I hear reports of unusually large canines in the deep forest. Hikers catch glimpses of creatures that are too big to be dogs, too coordinated to be wild, but they never approach human settlements anymore. I think our treaty is holding. Pete Marshall died 2 years after the incidents, but before he passed, he gave me a journal that had belonged to his father. It contained detailed accounts of similar encounters dating back to the 1890s. According to his records, the shadow dogs appear whenever the forest ecosystem is under severe stress. They emerge, establish temporary dominance, then retreat when conditions improve. His father's theory was that they're some kind of guardian spirits, protectors of the deep wilderness. When the forest is threatened, they respond. But they're not mindlessly aggressive. They're intelligent, capable of negotiation and compromise. I'm 57 years old now, still working as a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest. I've trained 3 younger rangers to take over when I retire, and I've told them the real story of what happened in 1988. I've shown them the bone, the photographs, the reports. Most importantly, I've taught them to watch for the signs: environmental stress, unusual animal behavior, reports of oversized predators. If the shadow dogs ever return, someone needs to be ready to communicate with them instead of just shooting. Because I learned something important that October night when I sat alone in the forest. The shadow dogs aren't our enemies. They're part of something larger, something older than human settlement in these mountains. They have their own rules, their own purposes, their own understanding of how the world should work. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to meet them on equal terms, they're willing to negotiate. The forest is quiet tonight. The creek is running full from recent rains. The wildlife is healthy and active, and the ecosystem is in balance. But I keep that carved bone on my desk as a reminder that we share this wilderness with forces we don't fully understand. And someday, when the forest is threatened again, the howlers of Panther Creek will return. I just hope whoever is wearing this ranger badge when that happens remembers the lesson I learned. Sometimes the most frightening things in the woods are also the most willing to find peace, if you know how to ask. My name is Jonathan Blackstone, but everyone calls me John. I've been a park ranger at Pisgah National Forest for 21 years now. At 46, I know these mountains like the back of my hand. Every trail, every cave, every creek that runs through this part of North Carolina. My great-grandmother was Cherokee. My great-grandfather came from Scotland. They met right here in these mountains back in 1903. Growing up, I heard all the old stories. Cherokee legends about giants sleeping in the mountains. Scottish tales about creatures in the deep places. I always thought they were just stories to keep children from wandering off alone. I should have listened better. I have a geology degree from UNC. That's why the Park Service put me in charge of watching the cave systems and checking for earthquake damage. I carry instruments that can tell me if the ground is moving. I map new caves when we find them. I check for rock slides and dangerous spots where hikers might get hurt. The work suits me. I like being alone in the woods. I like the quiet. My wife Sarah says I was born to live out here. Our kids, Emma and Jake, they love coming with me on the easy trails. Emma is 12 and wants to be a park ranger too. Jake is 9 and collects rocks. Stone Mountain is my favorite spot in the whole forest. It's not the tallest peak, but it has the best views. More important for my work, it has the most caves. The Cherokee called it the place where they rest. I thought that meant dead people were buried there long ago. I was wrong about what was resting there. It started 3 weeks ago with my earthquake machines. They're called seismometers, and they pick up tiny shakes in the ground that people can't feel. Usually they show small trembles from trucks on distant highways or maybe a tree falling down. But the readings from Stone Mountain were different. They showed movement deep, underground, like something huge was shifting around. The pattern was strange too. Every 6 hours, like clockwork. Natural earthquakes don't work that way. I called my supervisor, Mike Chen, and told him what I was seeing. Probably water moving through caves, he said. You know how these old mountains are full of holes. That made sense. We'd had a lot of rain that month. Underground rivers could be flowing in new directions, making sounds and vibrations. I decided to check it out. The next morning I packed my gear and hiked up to Stone Mountain. It's a 3-mile walk on a good trail, then another mile up a steep, rocky path that most tourists don't try. The air was crisp and clean. Birds were singing. Everything seemed normal. But when I got close to the mountain, I noticed something odd. No animals, no bird sounds, no squirrels chattering or bugs buzzing. The woods were dead quiet. I've been in these mountains for over 20 years. I know what quiet means out here. It usually means a big predator is nearby. Bears make the woods go quiet. So do mountain lions, though we don't see many of those. But this felt different. It felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I set up my instruments near the base of Stone Mountain, close to the main cave entrance. This cave goes back about 200 feet before it gets too narrow to crawl through. I've been in it dozens of times. I know every rock and turn. The seismometer started picking up those strange vibrations right away. Every 6 hours and 12 minutes to be exact. Deep underground, something big was moving. I checked my maps of the cave system. According to every survey we'd ever done, there was nothing below the main cave. Just solid rock going down for thousands of feet. But my instruments don't lie. Something was down there. I spent the next day exploring caves I hadn't checked in years. Some just cracks in the rock that went nowhere. Others were bigger but ended in walls of stone or underground pools too deep to cross. But in the main cave I found something new. A passage I'd never seen before, hidden behind a fallen rock that must have shifted recently. The opening was just big enough for a person to squeeze through. I should have waited. I should have brought backup. But I'm a curious man, and I've been exploring caves since I was a kid. I had my headlamp, my radio, and enough rope to get out of trouble. The new passage went down at a steep angle. The walls were smooth, like they'd been carved by water over thousands of years. But there were marks on them that didn't look natural. Scratches that looked almost like writing. I took pictures with my digital camera. The flash lit up symbols cut deep into the rock. They looked similar to Cherokee petroglyphs I'd seen in other parts of the forest, but these were different. Older, somehow. The passage kept going down. My altimeter watch showed I'd dropped over 100 feet below the main cave. That should have been impossible. All our maps showed solid granite down here. Then I heard something that made my blood go cold. Breathing. Slow, deep breaths echoing from somewhere ahead of me in the dark. Each breath lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then silence for a long time. Then another breath. I stopped and listened. My heart was pounding so loud I thought whatever was breathing might hear it. But the slow rhythm continued. In, out, long pause. In, out. I almost turned back. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. But I'm a scientist. I needed to know what I was hearing. The passage opened into a cavern bigger than any I'd ever seen. My headlamp beam couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls, but it lit up something that made me gasp out loud. Shapes. Huge shapes lying on the cavern floor, arranged in a perfect circle. At first, I thought they were rock formations, strange pillars or stalagmites that had grown in unusual ways. Then I saw the fingers. The nearest shape had what looked like a giant hand, each finger as thick as my whole body. The hand was connected to an arm, and the arm to a massive shoulder. I followed the shape with my light and realized I was looking at a person. A person 20 feet tall, lying on their side like they were sleeping. Their skin looked like gray stone, but as I got closer, I could see it rise and fall slightly. They were breathing. The slow, deep breaths I'd been hearing. I counted 12 of them, all arranged in a circle around something in the center. Men and women, all giants, all sleeping. Some had long hair that looked like moss. Others had beards like tangled roots. In the center of the circle was the biggest one of all. This giant was wearing a crown made of crystals that grew right out of the cave walls. Even lying down, they would have been 25 feet tall standing up. I'm a rational man. I have a college degree. I know the difference between real and fake, but I was looking at something that shouldn't exist, breathing air in a place that shouldn't be possible. I took pictures, though I wasn't sure anyone would believe them. I measured distances with my laser rangefinder. I took rock samples from the cave walls, and then the biggest giant opened their eyes, just for a second. Two huge eyes, pale blue like winter ice, looked right at me. I felt something touch my mind. Gentle but overwhelming. Images flashed through my head. Mountains rising from the sea, forests growing and dying, ice sheets moving across the land. And through it all, these giants, watching and waiting. The eyes closed again, but I knew the giant had seen me. More than seen me. They had looked into my thoughts and memories. I ran. I stumbled back through the narrow passage, scraping my knees and elbows on the rough walls. I didn't stop until I was outside in the sunlight, gasping for breath. My radio was buzzing. Mike. Chen's voice crackled through the static. John, you there? We're getting some weird readings from your seismometer. Looks like you had a major shake about 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago was exactly when the giant had opened their eyes. I'm here, Mike. Just checking the equipment. Everything looks normal. But nothing was normal. Nothing would ever be normal again. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale blue eyes looking at me. I felt that presence touching my thoughts. Part of me wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd hit my head in the cave. Maybe the lack of oxygen had made me hallucinate. But the photos on my camera were real. The measurements were real. And the seismometer readings were getting stronger. The next morning, I called in sick and drove back to Stone Mountain. I had to know if what I'd seen was real. The giants were still there, still sleeping in their perfect circle. But something had changed. The air in the cavern felt warmer, and the breathing was faster now, maybe one breath every 20 seconds instead of 30. I set up my equipment and started taking more careful measurements. The cavern was enormous, easily 300 feet across and at least 100 feet high. The walls were covered with those strange symbols, thousands of them, telling some kind of story I couldn't read. I was so focused on my work that I didn't notice when one of the smaller giants started to wake up. I heard a sound like grinding stone. When I looked up, one of the giants at the edge of the circle was moving, just slightly, but definitely moving. Their fingers were flexing, their eyes were moving under their eyelids like they were dreaming. Then their eyes opened. These eyes were different from the big giants. Younger, somehow, and definitely aware. The giant looked right at me and sat up slowly. Even sitting, they were 12 feet tall. They were a woman, I realized, with long hair that looked like silver moss. She was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, like staring at the sun. She spoke, but not with her mouth. The words appeared in my head, gentle but clear. You are the one who tends the mountain. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. I am Ayana. I have slept for 3,000 years. Why do I wake? Somehow I found my voice. I don't know. There's been seismic activity. The mountain is shaking. She tilted her head like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. The mountain cries out in pain. The earth movers come with their thunder tools. They will break the deep places. Earth movers? You mean construction equipment? Images flashed in my mind. I saw the mining company that had been trying to get permits to dig on the north side of Stone Mountain. They wanted to extract granite for building projects in Charlotte. The Park Service had been fighting them in court for months. If they wake the sleepers too quickly, the mountain will not survive. We will not survive, and the balance will be broken. What balance? But she was already lying back down, her eyes closing again. Within minutes, her breathing had slowed back to the deep, steady rhythm. I spent the rest of the day in the cavern, taking notes and trying to understand what I'd learned. These weren't just random giants. They were connected to the mountain somehow, connected to the earth itself. That night, I researched everything I could find about the Cherokee legends my great-grandmother had told me. Stories about the first people, giants who lived in the mountains before humans came. Giants who went to sleep when the world changed, but who would wake up if the mountains were ever in danger. I'd always thought they were just stories. The next morning, Mike Chen called with bad news. The mining company won their appeal, John. They start blasting next Monday, right on the north face of Stone Mountain. My blood went cold. They can't do that. The environmental impact study got over. Ruled by some federal judge who thinks jobs are more important than trees. I'm sorry, John. I know how much that mountain means to you. It wasn't just about what the mountain meant to me anymore. It was about what lived inside it. I had 4 days to figure out how to stop them. I went back to the cavern that afternoon. This time, more of the giants were stirring. I could see eyes opening and closing around the circle. The big one in the center was breathing faster, and a low humming sound was coming from their throat. Ayana sat up again when she sensed me coming. The danger comes soon. We feel the thunder tools gathering above. I'm trying to stop them, I said, but I don't know how. If I tell people about you, they won't believe me. And even if they did, they would make us into curiosities, put us in cages of glass and metal, study us like insects. She was right. Even if people believed me, the government would never let sleeping giants rest in peace. They'd want to study them, move them, maybe even wake them up completely. There may be another way, Ayanna said. But it is dangerous for your kind. What do you mean? She stood up slowly, her head nearly touching the cavern ceiling. Even though I knew she was trying to help, seeing something that big move was terrifying. We can speak to the mountain, make it unwelcoming to the thunder tools. But if we wake too quickly, the mountain will shake. Your people above might be hurt. How much shaking? Enough to make the earth movers flee, not enough to harm those who respect the mountain. I thought about the hikers and campers who might be on the trails. Most of them would be smart enough to get to safety if the ground started moving. But the mining crew would be using heavy equipment. They'd be in real danger. I need to warn people first, I said. Give me until Sunday night. Then do what you have to do. Sunday night, she agreed. But no longer. The thunder tools must not touch the deep places. I spent the next 3 days calling in favors and pulling strings I didn't even know I had. I contacted every environmental group in the state. I called reporters. I even called my cousin who worked for the governor's office. Nobody could stop the mining company. Their permits were legal, their equipment was already on site, and they had a deadline to meet. Sunday night, I was back in the cavern. All 12 giants were awake now, sitting in their circle with their eyes glowing like blue stars in the darkness. The big one in the center was standing, their crystal crown scraping the cavern ceiling. It is time, Ayanna said. Stand clear, mountain tender, and do not fear what comes. The humming sound I'd heard before got louder. All 12 giants were making it now, a deep vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. My bones felt like tuning forks. The mountain began to wake up. The shaking started gentle, like a freight train passing in the distance. But within minutes it was strong enough to knock me off my feet. The giants kept humming, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to reach into the bedrock itself. I scrambled out of the cavern as fast as I could, following the narrow passage by feel more than sight. Behind me, the humming grew louder and deeper. The mountain was singing. When I reached the main cave entrance, the sun was just coming up. The ground was rolling like ocean waves. Trees were swaying even though there was no wind. In the distance, I could hear car alarms going off in the towns below. My radio crackled to life. Mike Chen's voice was tight with panic. John, are you on the mountain? We've got a major earthquake happening. Get to safety now. I'm okay, Mike. I'm heading down. But I wasn't heading down. I was climbing higher, toward the north face where the mining company had set up their equipment. I had to see what the giants' awakening would do. The mining site was chaos. Workers were running for their trucks as massive drilling rigs swayed back and forth like toys. One of the big hauling trucks tipped over when the ground shifted underneath it. Nobody was hurt, but the message was clear: the mountain didn't want them there. Then I saw something that made my jaw drop. The rock face where they'd planned to start blasting was changing. Cracks were appearing in patterns that looked almost like the symbols I'd seen in the deep cavern. As I watched, chunks of granite fell away, revealing smooth stone underneath. Stone that looked like sleeping faces. The giants weren't just in the deep cavern. They were part of the mountain itself. The whole north face was covered with sleeping stone giants, each one hundreds of feet tall. The mining company had been about to blast apart living beings without even knowing it. The workers saw it too. Even from a distance, I could see them pointing and shouting. A few of them took pictures with their phones before their supervisors ordered them to evacuate. The earthquake lasted for 20 minutes. When it stopped, the mountain was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet than before. It felt alive and watchful, like the mountain itself was awake now. I made my way back to the deep cavern. The passage seemed wider now, easier to travel. The giants were still sitting in their circle, but their eyes were open and alert. The big one in the center spoke to me for the first time. Their voice was like distant thunder in my mind. I am Sequana, first of the sleepers. For 30 centuries, we have kept the deep places stable. We have held the mountains' roots together and guided the flow of waters beneath the earth. The mining company, I said. Did you scare them off? We showed them the truth, that this mountain lives and breathes and has a spirit older than their cities. They will not return with their thunder tools. Ayana stood and walked over to where I was standing. Up close, her stone skin looked almost human, except for the tiny crystals that grew along her arms and shoulders. Danger is not over, Mountain Tender. More earth movers will come. Your people multiply like spring flowers, and they hunger for the bones of the mountain. So, what happens now? Do you go back to sleep? Some of us will sleep again, but some must remain awake to guard the deep places. The long dream is ending. The time of watching has begun. Sequana stepped forward, and I felt the full weight of their ancient presence. They had seen the world when it was young. They had watched the first humans learn to make fire. They had slept through the rise and fall of civilizations I'd never heard of. You have been chosen, Jonathan Blackstone, child of two peoples. You understand both the old ways and the new. Will you help us protect this place? I don't understand. How can I help? Be our voice in the world above. When the earth movers come with their papers and their promises, speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. When your people forget that the mountains are alive, remind them. Images flooded my mind. I saw myself giving testimony at court hearings, my words carrying a weight and authority they'd never had before. I saw environmental groups flocking to protect Stone Mountain, guided by information I would provide. I saw the mountain becoming a place of pilgrimage, where people came to remember their connection to the living earth. But I also saw the cost. Years of fighting corporations and government bureaucrats. Years of being called crazy by people who couldn't see what I'd seen. Years of carrying secrets that would isolate me from everyone except my family. What about my wife and kids? They will understand, in time. The gift runs in your bloodline. Your daughter especially has the sight. She will help carry this burden when you are old. Emma, my 12-year-old daughter who collected rocks and wanted to be a park ranger, who sometimes knew things she shouldn't know and saw animals that other people missed. And if I say no, then we will do what we must. But it will be harder for your people and ours. There will be more shaking, more fear, more conflict. I thought about everything I'd seen. The sleeping giants in their circle of stone. The mountain faces that were actually ancient beings. The delicate balance that had kept this place stable for thousands of years. I'll do it, I said. Sequana nodded slowly, and I felt something change inside me. A connection to the mountain that hadn't been there before. I could sense the underground rivers flowing through hidden channels. I could feel the slow pulse of the earth's heartbeat. I could hear the whispered conversations of stones. Then sleep now, most of us. Dream the deep dreams and hold the mountain steady. Ayana will remain awake to guide and teach. And you, Mountain Tender, will be our bridge between the world that sleeps and the world that has forgotten how to dream. One by one, the giants lay back down in their circle. Their breathing slowed, their eyes closed. Within minutes, most of them looked like stone formations again. But Ayana remained sitting, her blue eyes watching me with ancient kindness. Come when you need guidance, she said. The path between worlds is always open to you now. That was 6 months ago. The mining company never came back. They claimed their equipment malfunctioned and their geological surveys were wrong. The insurance company blamed the earthquake damage on acts of God. The federal government declared Stone Mountain a protected geological site after I submitted my report about unprecedented seismic instability. I didn't mention the giants, but I included enough technical data to make it clear that any excavation would be dangerous. Mike Chen got promoted to regional supervisor. He put me in charge of the entire Stone Mountain area, with a budget big enough to hire 2 assistant rangers and fund a proper research station. I've been back to the deep cavern dozens of times. Ayanna is always there, sometimes sleeping, sometimes awake and ready to talk. She's teaching me about the old ways, about how to read the mountain's moods and understand what the earth is trying to say. Emma comes with me sometimes. She can see Ayanna too, though she's not ready to go into the deep cavern yet. For now, she helps me monitor the seismometers and catalog the strange rock formations that keep appearing around the mountain. Sarah thinks I've changed. She's right. I'm more serious now, more focused on my work. But I'm also more at peace than I've ever been. I know my purpose. I know why I'm here. The giants still wake up sometimes, especially when there's danger to the mountain. Last month, a development company tried to buy land on the south slope for a shopping center. The night after their surveyors showed up, every tree on that slope moved 3 feet to the left. The company decided to build somewhere else. People are starting to notice that Stone Mountain is different. Hikers report feeling watched, but not in a threatening way. More like the mountain is aware of them and making sure they're safe. Wildlife populations are increasing. Springs that had been dry for years are flowing again. The Cherokee Nation has started sending delegations to visit the mountain. They don't talk about giants, but they perform ceremonies that Ayanna says are similar to ones their ancestors did thousands of years ago. The connection between the old ways and the new ways is growing stronger. I keep detailed records of everything now, not just the seismic readings and cave surveys, but also the things that can't be measured with instruments. The dreams that feel too real to be dreams. The voices that speak without words. The sense that the mountain is slowly waking up after a very long sleep. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found that hidden passage. If I'd just filed my reports and ignored the strange readings. The mining company would have started blasting. The giants would have woken up angry instead of alert. The mountain would have shaken itself apart rather than let itself be destroyed. But that's not what happened. Instead, I found my place in a story that's older than recorded history. I became the guardian of beings who've been guardian themselves for longer than human civilization has existed. At night, when I'm alone in my cabin, I can feel them down there in the deep places, most of them sleeping, but some awake and watching, keeping the mountain stable, guiding the flow of underground rivers, maintaining the delicate balance that keeps this whole ecosystem alive. And I sleep better knowing they're there, knowing that some things in this world are older and wiser than human ambition, knowing that the mountains really are alive and that they have guardians who will never stop protecting them. Emma asked me yesterday if she'll be a park ranger like me when she grows up. Maybe, I told her. Or maybe you'll be something even more important. She smiled like she already knew what I meant. The mountains keep their secrets well, but not from those who are chosen to guard them. And the sleepers of Stone Mountain dream on, one eye always open, watching over the world they helped create.